Nights returned home one morning. This is an account of the first 2 nights at home with him. I was just about to put a pot of coffee on when something brown caught my eye, right outside the kitchen window. At first glance, I thought I must have left a coat out on the porch, but upon closer investigation, I realized it wasn't a coat after all, but something alive. I nearly leapt through the glass when it hit me that I recognized this animal. On the porch was my dog, Moose, who disappeared one night 5 months ago. I'll never forget that day. I came home from a late shift at work to a vacant house. Moose was always there to greet me at the door, wagging his bushy tail with his tongue hanging slightly out of the left side of his jaw. That night, though, it was deathly silent. My attempts at calling his name were never answered. I searched my house, front to back, at least 10 times. When that didn't pan out, I took my search outside, where I covered the yard, then expanded my search into the nearby woods. I never found a trace of where he might have gone. The following days were spent calling anyone I could think of and putting up posters everywhere. My efforts never bore any fruit. My soul was crushed. It was as if Moose vanished into thin air. Now, though, there he was, curled up into a ball on my porch. I flung the door open. With enough force, it threatened to fly off the hinges, and wrapped him in my arms. After I completed my warm reunion with my dog, I pulled away and took a good look at him. I noticed that he hadn't wagged his tail or made any sort of noise at all like he normally did, which made me worry. Hugging him felt like I was wrapping my arms around a statue. Then I noticed something that made me scream. His eyes were gone. They looked like they had been deliberately carved out of his skull with a sharp object, not like anything that could have been caused by an accident. A feeling of shock took over me, which slowly dissolved into rage. What kind of twisted individual would do this to an animal? Worried for his health, I decided my best plan of action would be to take him to a vet. Moose didn't complain or emit any kind of emotion as I picked him up and put him in the backseat of my car. I honestly felt so bad for him. I had no idea what he might have gone through. I knew whatever had happened wasn't pleasant at all. In my mind, I pictured a small rusted cage where he was tormented day and night. I bit down hard enough on my tongue that I tasted blood, and tried my best to shake these kind of thoughts out of my mind. It wasn't going to do me any good to think like that. I was just happy Moose was back. An uneasy feeling crept up on me as I drove. My gaze shifted upward to the rearview mirror, where I looked at Moose in the back seat. When I did, I nearly swerved off the road. His head was tilted slightly at an odd angle that made it appear as if he was staring right back at me through his hollow eyes. I refrained from looking again for the rest of the drive. We finally made it to the vet and I took him in. I got the vet to do a full workup on him and to make sure nothing else was wrong with him. I was told he was in good health, aside from the fact that my dog was now blind. I received some medicine to help prevent any infection in his eyes, and a pamphlet about living with a blind pet, with tips on how to improve their quality of life. I finally got Moose home after the long ride, where I focused all my attention, staring at the road. Letting Moose out of the car, I noticed he seemed to have no problem whatsoever getting up the stairs and making his way into the house, which sort of freaked me out. I just assumed he had memorized the layout because he's been there so long. That night, I double-checked every possible way out of my house to be sure everything was locked. I didn't just get him back so he could wander out of an open window or door. Moose tried to follow me to bed like he always did, but I led him out and back to the couch. It was harder for me to find sleep than I anticipated. The feeling of eyes on me kept me up. I kept looking from my cracked bedroom door, almost anticipating someone being there. Eventually, though, my eyes closed and I drifted off. I woke up sometime early in the morning, right as the sun was trying to breach the horizon. I reached over to check the time on my phone. Before I got to my phone, a shape outlined in my doorway caught my attention. I turned my head to see Moose, peeking through my cracked door, looking dead at me. He was barely illuminated, but I could tell something was wrong about his outline. He looked bigger, and his silhouette contained sharp protrusions shooting out of it. My heart rate raced upwards as I took in the sight before me. I guess he somehow noticed me looking, because he slowly disappeared past the door. I heard floorboards bend and creak as he made his way back down the hall. I laid in my bed well after the sun came up. I cracked my door and tiptoed into the living room where I saw Moose sitting at the front door. He looked like he should. I felt like a fool for being scared of my own dog. His head turned as I entered and I walked over to pat him on the head. I was relieved I didn't walk in to see some mutated horror that was once my dog. I tried to shift the blame on me still being half asleep. A little while later I got ready and left for work. Before I did, I made sure Moose had some food and water, then told him goodbye and left for my shift. The whole time I was at work, I couldn't help but think back on what I had seen that morning. I was just seeing things, right? When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I saw Moose looking out through the living room window at me. I say looking because the way his head was facing the window, peering out at me in my car. It was like I could feel his gaze on me. I tried to ignore the goosebumps breaking out over my body as I got out of my car and headed for the front door. I watched the window as my foot landed on the first step and Moose hopped down from the window. I knew where he was heading. Right as I opened the door, Moose was there. I was happy for a moment because it reminded me of how it always was before he vanished. I walked past and gave him a pat on the head and told him he was a good boy. Sure, he unnerved me a little bit, but I could never be scared of my Moose. I still remember the day my parents brought him home from the shelter. Since then, he's always been by my side. The rest of the evening was uneventful. I cooked dinner and gave Moose a healthy scoop of dog food that he practically inhaled. Me and Moose sat in the living room with a movie playing. I have the weekend off, so I had a few drinks during the movie. I noticed Moose was acting strange. Looking over at him, he was stiff as a board, peering out the window into the night, like he was seeing something out there. When the movie finally ended, along with my drinks, the Moose was still looking outside. I figured I would give the yard a once-over with the flashlight to calm my nerves. I grabbed the flashlight I kept under the sink and opened my front door to peer out into the abyss that my yard became after sundown. My house is positioned a good ways off the road, so the street lamp's glow doesn't reach it. I scanned the tree line trying to see if anything was out there. Staring out, I felt as if the trees themselves were looking back at me. After a few minutes of scanning back and forth, I gave up. Whatever had Moose so spooked was beyond me. I got back inside and was getting ready for bed, while Moose was still looking out the window. The only time he got up was to follow me into my bedroom, where I walked him back out to the couch and told him good night. That night I woke up to Moose barking. I leaned over to grab my phone, which told me it was 3:15 a.m. I hurried out of my room but froze halfway down the hallway. There was something off with Moose's barking. It was like he was reaching a lower octave with each bark. It didn't sound like it used to either. There was something predatorial about it. I slowly reached the end of the hall and peered around the wood paneling to get a look at where Moose was. When I saw Moose, I nearly cried out, but stopped myself with a hand over my mouth. He looked as if he had put on at least 50 pounds. But that wasn't all, though. His back was arched upward like a cat when it's scared, and parts of his spine had broken through his skin. Each exposed vertebra was sharp and serrated. His teeth were bared, with his mouth curled into a snarl. I was so close to his bark now that it seemed to shake my very being. His attention wasn't on me, though. His body was positioned facing the window, the same one he couldn't take his eyes off earlier. This time, it wasn't only the darkness looking back beyond the window. It was accompanied by 2 wide eyes and a manic smile. My heart nearly jumped into my throat when I saw it. Then his gaze, which was fixed on Moose, shifted over to me, and this time I wasn't fast enough to suppress my scream. Moose began to turn around. His head turned with his body as he stood mere feet from me, empty sockets instantly locking with my eyes. He stared intently for what felt like forever, until I heard a knock at the door, followed by what sounded like stifled laughter, like a hand clasped over a mouth, only allowing little pieces of it to escape. My attention shifted from Moose to the front door as the knocking began to grow louder. Moose whirled around to face the door and began barking again. I just stood there, shaking. I couldn't move. My heartbeat was in my ears and I was sure it was about to give out. The laughing grew and grew as I saw the doorway start to give under this person's inhuman strength. The door cracked and splintered as the man's blood-soaked hands began to appear from the other side. Moose was growling something guttural and low as the man reached one of his arms through the new hole in my door, trying to open it, ripping off little ribbons of flesh as he worked his way down. Laughter exploded into the room as the man's grip finally found the inside lock and began to turn. Horror processed my entire being as the door slowly opened up to show a man who was at least 7 foot tall and bone thin. He stood right in the doorway, with one of his bloody hands over his mouth, cackling like a disturbed child.
"There you are."
Those were the only words that escaped his lips, before Moose launched himself at him. The man went completely airborne when Moose struck him. He crashed through the railing on the porch and was swallowed up by the darkness beyond. Moose trailed right behind him into the abyss. I sat there, with my now empty bladder, as the laughter from the man and Moose's howls grew quieter and quieter. How long I sat motionless before moving again is anyone's guess. When I regained myself, the only thing I could think of to do was call the police. I repeated the night's event, only leaving out the part what happened to Moose. I doubt they would believe that. At the time, I wasn't sure I believed what I had seen either. I just told them that Moose chased him off and hasn't come back. It wasn't long before I heard sirens, and blue lights filled my yard. They asked me a few questions before a few officers went and scanned the surrounding woods and streets. I sat in my kitchen on a stool, trying to process what had just happened. The sun rose before I heard any news. It didn't calm my nerves in the slightest. I was told they found signs of a struggle in multiple locations, but never found the man I described. There was no sign of Moose either. The detective gave me his number and told me to call him if anything came up. And with that, I was alone in my house, trying to do anything that would help me not be alone with my thoughts. I decided to go pick up a new door. There was no way on earth I was sleeping without one. Well, That's if I could even fall asleep. After a long and quiet trip to Lowe's, I came home and started my work. It was slow at first, as I had no carpentry experience whatsoever, along with last night's events playing on an endless loop in my head. I found myself worrying about Moose. I was scared senseless the moment I saw him, but somehow I still thought of him as my dog. That night, it felt like he was trying to protect me. I hoped he was okay. I wanted him back home, even though he wasn't the same dog I knew before he disappeared. I finished putting in the new door the best I could. I was honestly proud of myself. It actually turned out better than I had hoped. The remainder of the day was spent periodically checking outside and doing chores around the house to quiet my thoughts. I had just finished eating dinner when I heard movement on my front porch. It was muffled behind the door, but I could tell something was there. Slowly rising to my feet, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, seeing that man's crazed eyes and smile in my mind. My heart rate quickened as I held my breath while creeping up to the door. I was trying my best to stay calm, but I was losing the battle. I slowly looked through the peephole in the door and dropped the knife to the ground. I didn't see the man from the night before. Instead, Moose was lying curled up on my welcome mat. No fear I had of him drained out of me as I opened the door and wrapped him in my arms, just like I had done when he showed up a few days ago. There were cuts all over him, and a large gash in his leg which I quickly wrapped the best I could. Moose laid on the floor panting as I made him a meal and called the vet, completely forgetting that they weren't open. I just sat with him for a long while to make sure he was okay, until I noticed he had fallen asleep. It's been a few weeks since then. Now me and Moose are almost inseparable. Slowly, as time passed, he began to act more lively like he was before he vanished. I haven't seen him in that form like he was that night. I still think about it every once in a while, but then I take a good look at him, and honestly, it doesn't really affect me anymore. I know Moose would never hurt me. Every night I still make sure my house is secure. Not to keep Moose in, but keep whoever showed up that night out. The police never found the man. I still dream of that face in my window, and it makes my blood turn to ice. One more thing that's changed. After that night, I no longer bar Moose from my bedroom at night. He follows me in and lays on the new dog bed I have placed right beside me. My name is Daniel. I am 42 years old and I live in southeast London. I am an executive for an international plastics company. I have a beautiful wife, 2 rambunctious children, and a dog named Bongo. At first sight, you would say we are the very image of a perfect family. If you look around our flat, you would see photos of us at family picnics, selfies in the London Eye, and beautifully serene vacations around Europe. Waking up this morning to tickle fights and being slapped in the face by a confused and enthusiastic dogtail is the beginning of every romantic comedy we hope to live. I would love to be Daniel forever, but today is my last day. Today is always my last day. Allow me to explain. This isn't a suicide note to my beloved family. In fact, I met them all for the first time this morning with the aforementioned tickle fight. Yesterday, my name was Jake. I was a 26-year-old sailor on leave in Norfolk, Virginia. I had an amazing boyfriend of 2 years. In fact, if I was still Jake today, I was intending on proposing to the love of my life. Well, the love of a life. The day before that, my name was Sarah. I was an 18-year-old high school graduate during beach week. Let me tell you, I have woken up to my first hangover more times than I care to remember. I have been every age from 13 to 85, every sex, every race, every sexual orientation, and every gender identity. All of my lives have been unique and beautiful in their own way, but none have truly been my own, and none have lasted longer than 23 hours and 59 minutes. The first time it happened, I thought it was a dream. I thought it was an elaborate nightmare that I couldn't wake from. But then, when I died in my dream, I didn't wake up in my bed or even my body. I woke up with a whole new set of memories and people surrounding me. I thought I was going mad. The first few times my days ended in psych wards, bathtubs surrounded by pools of my own blood, and even skydiving sans parachute. But every morning, I woke up anew. A new body, a new history, a new everything. Eventually, I grew accustomed to my fate and had to find a way to live 23 hours and 59 minutes at a time. I never know how I'm going to die, but I do know it will happen without fail. Besides my own hand, I have been struck by vehicles, burned alive, shot by jealous lovers, had trees fallen on me, stung by a bee, drowned in a pool, and aneurysms galore. There have been some lives I have led that, when I wake up, I know exactly how I will die, and others it's a complete mystery. For example, when I was Jake yesterday, I was jostled awake by a very orally talented Marine, and the morning before, Sarah was tied in the trunk of a car. Both very different scenarios starting out, and very similar endings followed. Jake was subsequently stabbed in the back by a homeless man whom I neglected to give change to, and Sarah is yet another incident teen who was murdered by a local serial killer. I will say, I'd rather have Sarah's fate than Jake's, hand over fist. Dying alone is much easier than dying with people you love around you. You never want to see people crying over you when you are trying to get to the other side. I think that is why pets hide when they know their time is coming. Honestly, it draws out the pain longer because you cannot concentrate. It's like someone pounding on the door when you are constipated and trying to take a shit. Leave me alone and let me go. So far, I have lived 2,543 different lives, and I've died 2,542 times. So, by now, I am definitely the foremost expert at dying 101. If you did your math correctly, you would have figured out I have been doing this close to 7 years now. I am not really sure what caused my, as I call it, curse to appear, but I think it had something to do with the way I lived my first life. Well, my life. My first name was Robert Raintree, but my friends called me Billy the Kid, and not in a loving way. I was quite the spoiled brat, to say the least. I came from a well-to-do family in Manhattan. I had everything going for me. Money, looks, women, men, cars, you name it. I easily got it. But, like every cliched playboy, eventually it all caught up to me. I made many enemies. From the doorman I never tipped in my penthouse, to the jilted spouses of my many lovers. I did not leave a good impression on this earth. What finally did me in, though, was not an accident or a grisly murder, but good old-fashioned karma. Literally, I was killed by karma. I was leaving the hotel from a one-night stand with a married senator. Classy, I know. And there was a torrential downpour. My private car was running late, and I was not one to wait around. So, I found a cab, pushed the little old lady who originally hailed it out of my way. She fell to the ground, and I got right in. Again, I was the epitome of class. The cab itself was disgusting, as most cabs in Manhattan are, ripe with rancid body odor, sticky floors, and stains of all kinds of fluids. That alone should have been my punishment, to be honest. Fate had other things in store, though. As I was exiting the cab, I slipped, fell, and hit my head. I fell into a coma and stayed like that until one day I woke up in my second life. Max, a dirt farmer in Idaho. I honestly feel bad for Max's family. Like I mentioned before, I thought I was dreaming the first time it happened. So, when I ran headfirst into a wood chipper in front of my family, I thought it would wake me straight up into Billy's fantastically easy life. But when I woke up as Samantha, the pregnant runaway, I knew something was very wrong. Since then, I have learned that I am not dreaming, and my actions, though no longer Billy's, have real consequences. I learned that unfortunate bit when I woke up in a psych ward as Max's son, who apparently got a mouthful of dear old dad's soup 2 years prior. I don't know what cosmic being is doing this to me. Maybe I am not alone, and this happens to us all, but on different time spans or circumstance. Perhaps I am just being punished by having to live the hardest day of other people's lives for them. And for all I know, saints, when they die, get to live everyone's best orgasms. I have come to accept this as my punishment. I am not sure if there is a way out of it. I have tried to live with dignity and help people as much as I have hurt them in my past. But even that isn't enough, it seems. Maybe there is no way out. Maybe I am destined to play out someone else's final day for the rest of eternity. Or, at least until people cease to exist. And if there are no more people, there would be no more lives to live. Then maybe I can finally stay dead. Maybe one of these days I can jump into a world leader and speed things along. One can only hope. Did anyone who lived around Seattle in the 90s remember Dr. Volkov's children's laboratory? I don't remember the specific town. My mum and I moved around a lot. But I definitely remember Dr. Volkov, and I remember hearing his commercials on the radio. I remember he said he'd give whatever families would let him borrow their kids something like $100,000, which, honestly, sounds super suspicious. But hey, my mum was a single parent who just needed some cash. I was 8, I think, when she first signed me up, and one of my most vivid memories from this was walking into the lab for the first time. It actually looked pretty fun. It was like a giant playground, with slides and swings and anything else a dirty little kid would want to get their hands on. There were 3 other kids there, and we played hide and seek together while our parents chatted and signed some papers. Then Dr. Volkov came in. He had a very strong accent, which I couldn't place at the time, but I now recognize as Russian. "Hello, families. I thank you for giving up your free time to take part in my studies. I assure you, if I am successful with these experiments, we will make history," he said, and the parents gave a polite applause. Us kids caught on too, and gave our cheers, which were not as quiet. Once the parents leave, I will take the children and start my studies. They should be returned to you within the next year, give or take, he said, and the parents murmured to each other. Once again, thank you for your sacrifices. I will see the parents off now. Farewell. Children, say goodbye to Mommy and Daddy, Dr. Volkov said. We all waved goodbye, except for one girl who ran up to her dad and hugged him. I wished I had done that too now. After the parents left, Dr. Volkov turned to us. Hello, little ones. I am so excited to work with you. Now, follow me. We followed him into the lab, which was decidedly less fun than the front of his lab. It was all white, with 5 rooms with big metal doors decorated the sides of the hallway, one for each kid. There was some strange equipment that I didn't know the names of. There were 4 kids, 3 boys including me and 1 girl. We introduced ourselves. There was me, Michael, and Dalton, who were both 8. Then there was Cassandra, who was 9. And the oldest, Andrew, was 10. Dr. Volkov explained that we'd still have time to play together, an hour a day, but most of our time would be spent working on our experiment. Dalton raised his hand. What's the experiment? Dr. Volkov smiled. It almost looked fake. Who here has ever wanted to have superpowers? All 4 of us went ballistic. We all wanted to be heroes. What if I told you that it is made possible with us? That's right. Over the course of a year, I will make you 4 into a group of superhumans, each with your own special power. All of us clapped. This sounded amazing. And with that, we were sent to our rooms. The interior of mine was strange. No toys or posters, or race car beds like the one I had at home. There were a lot of lights though, but a lot of them weren't on for some reason. I was tired, so I laid down on my little bed, decorated with lightning bolts, and went to sleep. The next day, Dr. Volkov taught us more about the experiment. He was going to condition us all to have superpowers, and then make a sort of super team to fight off bad guys. We all had different superpowers. I was going to get the power to manipulate energy, which made my room make a whole lot more sense. Dalton would be able to talk to the dead. Cassandra would be immortal. And Andrew was going to gain the strength of a gorilla, which we all thought was hilarious when we first heard it. Now training was to begin immediately, and they sent us all away to separate rooms. I was sat in a large chair where one of Dr. Volkov's assistants, named Katya, sat with me. Hello, Michael. How are you? We're going to make you into a superboy. Isn't that exciting? Now, this may hurt a little bit. Without warning, she pulled a lever, and the chair I was sitting on suddenly lit up. I had been shocked by an electric chair, and began to cry. Do not worry, little boy. It will not kill you, but it will make you strong. Don't you want electricity powers? I thought about it, and even though it hurt, electricity powers started to sound really cool. I nodded, and she shocked me again. I cried. And that was my life for the next while, getting shocked, crying, and getting shocked again. Until one day, maybe 2 or so months later, when they tried something different. Here, hold this, Michael, Katya said, handing me a metal rod. This will hopefully conduct enough electricity to go through to you and power that light bulb. Put your hand on the light bulb, Michael. I obliged. Now, ready? 3, 2, 1. She then shocked the rod, which sent electricity through me and into the light bulb. It hurt, but not as much as it should have. Katya smiled and called Dr. Volkov into my laboratory. He was elated. It works, child. See? All the days of training you to be resistant to electricity worked. Now we can continue our experiment. You earned your free time today for the day. Go play. It wasn't until then, when I went to play with the other kids, that I noticed the changes. We all looked weirder, less normal. Dalton kept on whispering to nobody and wouldn't really talk to us. Andrew looked weirdly buff and kept climbing on things. And Cassandra honestly looked kind of scary. She looked all stitched together, like a rag doll. As Dalton stood by himself, Cassandra and Andrew and I sat and talked. I don't like these experiments. It's scary, Andrew said. They keep on giving me shots, and then I have to lift weights. It hurts my arms. I later learned that the shots they were giving him were injecting him with gorilla DNA, which is terrifying to me. I'm scared too. They keep on hurting me. Every time a part of me dies, they stitch on a new one. See? Cassandra lifted her shirt, revealing part of her stomach that had been stitched back on. They say that if we do it enough times, I'll be immortal. Did you see what they're doing to Dalton? My room is next to his. I hear it all the time. They make him sit with dead bodies, and then he talks to them. It scares him a lot, Andrew said. I looked over to Dalton. He had big circles around his eyes, and looked pale and gaunt. I wondered if he had secretly been replaced by one of the dead bodies. That night, something weird happened. I was awoken by a bunch of red flashing lights and alarms. Something was wrong in the laboratory. Katya came and carried me out of bed, and I saw the other workers carrying the other kids out of bed too. Everyone except Dalton. We heard a bunch of screaming from another room as the three of us were ushered into our playroom. I held Cassandra's hand, and Andrew stood in front of us, trying to protect us. Suddenly we heard screaming. I have to join them. I have to join them. They told me. We heard Dalton yell as Dr. Volkov's voice desperately tried to calm him down. Screams, and then silence. For a long time. We slept on the stuffed animals in the playroom that night. We never saw Dalton after that, and his door was boarded up. At the time, I just assumed his mum took him home. But they didn't give us much time to look for him, because all of us had more experiments the very same day. Michael, do you remember when you did a great job with that experiment, and you made the light bulb light up? Well, that was a practice round. Next month we're going to do the real deal. We're going to put metal plates in your hands to make it so that you can conduct energy, even without holding the metal rod. Doesn't that sound great? Katya said. I squirmed in my seat. Yeah. I lied. And we did more training. I will say, the shocks hurt so much less than the first time. It was getting easier. As time went on, things got even more weird. Cassandra and I's rooms were right next to each other, so we could see each other a lot. She kept on getting more and more stitched up. One time, while we were playing in the playroom, we noticed Andrew wasn't there, which worried us. I heard Dr. Volkov and Andrew's worker, Alexei, talking. They said that he's acting strange. like a monkey. He's climbing everywhere and attacks them if they get too close. He doesn't even talk anymore," Cassandra said, adjusting a stitched piece of skin on her face. "Oh, how's your experiment going?" I asked. "Not very good. They say I'm making progress, and that the stuff they're giving me in shots is working. They say it's a chemical that makes people's endurance better. I think that's the word they used. But they still have to stitch me up sometimes. I don't know if it's really working, though. All they've been doing is hitting me with things and cutting me, not even actually killing me," she said. I looked at her arm. To my surprise, it had been completely sewn back on. That sucks. Mine's not going too good either. I don't even have electric powers yet. I thought I would. I said, "This place is getting boring. I'm sick of the playroom. Let's go exploring," Cassandra said, pulling me up from my seat as a stitch fell loose on her arm. I tried to resist, but she was strong. She dragged me through the halls, which were empty. I guess the workers were on their breaks. It was like a maze in there. When we went past the children's ward, aka our ward, we saw a bunch of medical stuff that looked weird. It looked fancy and official. There was a door at the end of the hallway which Cassandra pulled me into. Inside, we found a bunch of documents. We picked them up and started reading them. "The Volkov Experiment," she read out. "Conducted to test the limits of the human body and mind, mentally and physically. Subjects: Dalton McDermott, Michael Porter, Cassandra Colombo, and Andrew Scott. That's us." "Keep reading," I insisted. "Subjects will be repeatedly tortured under the rouse of being trained for greatness. They will be injected with placebo shots, beaten, electrocuted, forced to endure heavy physical activities, and locked in rooms with dead bodies. This experiment will test the theory formed by Dr. Dmitry Volkov, that if children are subjected to torture, while under the assumption the result will be positive, along with being given positive reinforcement from mentors, they will experience less or different traumatic responses to said torture." We looked at each other. "So, you mean we're not superheroes?" I asked. Tears formed in Cassandra's eyes, and we heard footsteps somewhere in the hallway. "We'd better get going," she said, grabbing my hand as more stitches fell loose in her arms. We raced down the hall and back into the playroom, just as Katya walked in. "Bedtime, children," she said, and she took us to our rooms where she tucked me into bed. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day is when all hell broke loose. During free time, Cassandra and I decided to check on Andrew, who hadn't left his room in days. "Andrew? Hello?" we said, opening the unlocked door. What I saw in there will haunt me for the rest of my life. He was going, no pun intended, apeshit, climbing on the walls of his room. His eyes were glazed like he had no idea what was going on. He wasn't even talking, just grunting and screaming. We ran to get an attendant. "Katya, Andrew's crazy. The gorilla DNA you put in him is not working," I said, and Katya ran to hide us in the playroom. Andrew had escaped his room. Cassandra and I pressed our ears to the door, trying to listen in. "Subject 4 is reacting poorly to the gorilla DNA, Dr. Volkov," Katya reported as they tried to track down Andrew. No, impossible. Dr. Volkov said. "We didn't give him any gorilla DNA. It was a placebo," he said. And even though at that age I didn't know what a placebo was, Cassandra and I still looked at each other in shock. "That's fascinating. Let me write this down," we heard him say. "No, Dr. Volkov, there's no time. There is a breach in his room. He is somewhere in the building," Katya said, panicked. No. Let me... "Dr. Volkov, subjects 2 and 3 are in danger, and so are we. There is no time." "It won't take..." "Dr. Volkov." Suddenly, we heard screaming and running, and chaos. I guess Andrew had found them. When everything was quiet, Cassandra carefully opened the door to the playroom. Dr. Volkov and Katya, or at least what remained of them, were lying on the floor, in a mess of blood. Andrew in the corner, hyperventilating. He turned around and rushed towards us. Cassandra screamed, but he stopped in front of us. Andrew?" I said shakily, not even expecting him to say anything. "Go. You're free," he hissed, and Cassandra and I stood there in shock. "Are you stupid? They're coming. Go before they get you," he said. And only then did we notice the men in biohazard suits running towards us. Cassandra and I ran and ran, until we found the exit into the playground at the front of the building. We heard gunshots behind us, and Andrew's screams. But we didn't care. All we could do was run out of the door, out of the hellhole we had been in for months. We waited outside the door for a while, waiting for Andrew to come out after us. But he never did. That was the last I saw of the Volkov experiment. No documents were ever published. No police reports. Nothing. Cassandra and I went our separate ways, back to our families, and soon, Mum and I moved towns. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamt the whole thing. But, just last week at the coffee shop, I saw a girl with strange stitches up and down her body. And as she left with her drink, we made eye contact. And I knew she recognized me too. I guess some things you just can't make up. I want to talk to you about the boy next door. I first noticed him when we arrived here. Mum was moving in all of our boxes and furniture, and I was sitting on one of Mum's boxes labelled Fragile, downing ice-cold lemonade. This wasn't exactly the weather for cold drinks, but I was pooped after spending my morning and half of my afternoon going back and forth with all our stuff. It was just a glimpse. One of the movers asked me to help him with a box of kitchen equipment. I was struggling to get a proper grip of it, twisting around to shout that I needed help, when I saw him. Not much of a person, more of a shadow poking from behind the fence. What I could make out was a tallish figure and mousy brown hair. I lifted my hand in a greeting, but the guy walked away. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was shy. Though I was curious about my neighbors, I was expecting them to join the parade of families on our doorstep, harboring every food you can imagine. But they stayed away. I did know a family existed next door, however. There was a large wooden fence separating us, so if I really wanted to talk to them, I'd either have to grow several feet taller, or invest in stilts. I'm not sure why I was so obsessed with meeting them. I knew they had kids my age. I could hear them. Whether they were arguing over video games or laughing at something trivial, I could always hear them when I was sitting on our wooden porch or helping Mum clean our yard. According to Mum, who heard it from a nice lady across the street, our neighbours were called the Wilders. There was a single mum and her 4 teenage kids. Huh, I thought. So Mystery Shadow Guy must have been a Wilder kid. I was told to not get too excited, though. Apparently, Mrs. Wilder was very protective over her children, and even homeschooled them. So there was no chance of me making friends or even getting to know them. On our second day in our new home, Mum told me over breakfast that Mrs. Wilder had sent out a polite notice to the neighbourhood that her children were not to be disturbed or talked to, which was crazy. I thought that was weird, but Mum understood it, and to my annoyance, accepted the woman's notice. I was warned not to talk to the Wilder children, and if I did, that was an automatic week grounding, which meant no dinner, no seeing friends after school, and my phone privileges taken away. According to her, she figured they were just a private family and wanted to accept that. She theorized the kids had been bullied at a public school and had to be homeschooled. But I was skeptical. All of them? I'd asked her through a mouthful of cereal. Phoebe? Mum sent me a warning look, sipping her coffee. What we're going to do is respect Mrs. Wilder's wishes. It's child abuse, I muttered into my frosted flakes, only for Mum to reach across the table and poke me with the prongs of her fork. Ow! Don't play with your food. I'm not playing with my food. I held up a spoonful of soggy cereal. You just never get the chocolate brand. These taste like sandpaper. We are going to be respectable neighbours, Mum said, ignoring me. So you are not going to speak to those kids. Do you understand? I knew Mum only wanted to abide by the weird rules because she was obsessed with joining the Mums Club, or whatever they called it. But it didn't make sense to me that this woman wasn't letting her own kids have a social life. At a younger age, maybe 11 or 12, I could understand. But 17? That was almost college age. What? Was she expecting to coddle them forever? Did she really think these kids were going to stay with her? 17 was the age of finding first loves and making mistakes, not staying at home with Mummy Dearest. Okay, but would you do this to me? I asked her. Would you really lock me up and stop me from going outside and living my life? Mum had been spreading butter on bread. I didn't realize her mood had drastically changed until she was almost slicing her finger with the knife. You don't know this yet because you're far too young. She lifted her head, her lips curving into a smile. But there is something called a mother's instinct. When our children are born, we are overcome with an almost feral need to protect them from danger. If you look it up, it is present in every creature, every mother. Our children are worth more than ourselves. We give our own lives to keep them alive. You can roll your eyes and say it's stupid, but I'm sure as soon as you have your own children, you will feel the exact same with them. She nodded at me. I had that with you. I still have it with you, Phoebe, no matter how old you are. When you were a baby, I wanted to hold you in my arms every second of every day. I hated it when people wanted to hold you, and you were such a clingy baby, and always cradled to my chest. As you grew up, I started to understand that you were seeing the world for the first time, and you needed your own space and time. I let you take your first steps on your own. I cried when you said your first word, and when I grabbed your hand and raced down the kindergarten steps for the first time, letting you go was painful. And if I had a choice in the matter, yes, I would keep you in here. I would stop you from going outside and seeing this world. She dropped the knife with a startling metallic clang before picking it back up. Because this planet is a scary place, Phoebe. And as mothers, it is our job to keep our kids safe, even if that means going to the slightest of extremes. Slightest of extremes, I scoffed, despite knowing I was being pedantic. They have to fly the nest. That's called growing up. Ignoring her glare, I continued. Yes, I believe in mother's instinct. But at what point do you have to look at yourself and realize you're being ridiculous? 17-year-olds aren't infants. They won't just blindly walk into traffic. They have self-awareness of what is wrong and right. I pointed at myself. You let me drive, right? I got my license. Where was your mother instinct when I got myself a big girl vehicle I could have easily had an accident in? Mum curled her lip. Don't push it. Leaning across the table, I fixed her with a smile. See, you trust me, Mum. You let me grow up. That's the difference between you and Mrs. Wilder. Kids have to grow up, no matter what the circumstances are. We all grow up and leave our parents. I sent her a look, stirring the soggy soup of my cereal. Well, unless you're Mrs. Wilder. Mum finished her coffee and stood up. You don't even know these children. They could be in any stage of development which makes them very different to you. All kids mentally age at different points. She took her plate to the faucet and dumped it in the bowl. Mum washed the dishes when she was angry or stressed, and she was really going to town on our brand new pattern plates. I saw that as a mark of finality. I'm done talking about this, okay? You're not 18 yet, which means you abide by my rules. And really, Phoebe, I'm not exactly holding you prisoner. I'm just asking you to be polite and follow a simple rule which is not hard. We are a new family, and we need to make a good impression, which means no talking to Mrs. Wilder's children. She cleared her throat. Respect our neighbours' wishes, or lose your phone. Ducking my head, I continued to stir my cereal into a mushy soup, which had quickly become unappetizing. It looked like barf. I pushed it away. You only want me to follow the rules so you can get into Mrs. Becker's book club and go on pirate dates with middle-aged Karens. Mum dropped a plate in the sink, and the sound of the splash made me flinch slightly. Is that understood? Yes, I said, rolling my eyes. Obviously, I will abide by the street's draconian rules so I can continue scrolling through TikTok. It was sarcasm, but I wasn't sure my mother could detect it. She was so blinded by becoming one of our neighbours. Why was she so obsessed with meeting all of the other mums anyway? Was she planning on setting me up on a playdate with 3-year-old Evie? I wouldn't put it past her doing that for brownie points. Good. End of conversation, Mum said, hurrying to get her jacket and bag. I'm late for work, and you have an induction to get to. I wanted to argue further because this sounded unfair. The kids were teenagers, right? How were they not arguing against this? It seemed insane that they were going along with what their mothers said. But I was aware of a significant punishment if I broke this rule, so I begrudgingly agreed. After my induction, I asked around new friends and classmates if anybody knew of the Wilder kids, and they did. But they didn't want to elaborate on what they knew. I heard a lot of rumours with dead ends. Most of them involved a father who had walked out on them, and their mother going into ultra-protective mode in response. It sounded like these kids were bearing the brunt of a messy divorce. They were complete enigmas. I didn't know anything about them except from their insanely overprotective mother's wicked grip on them. I gave up being curious. Mum was serious about me not speaking to them. She gave me a lecture on respecting the woman's privacy and blah blah blah. I tuned out after 5 minutes, my attention flicking to an episode of Breaking Bad playing on the lounge TV. The next few weeks were boring. Mum was invited to join Mrs. Becker's book club, so on Mondays at 5 p.m, I made myself scarce. I did exactly what Mum said. I ignored the kids next door. My bedroom happened to be facing the room of one of the kids, but their dark blue curtains were always shut. Sometimes it was hard. When I was sitting in the yard reading a book, I could hear them on the other side of the fence. The boys were the most vocal, laughing and teasing each other. There was a point when I risked it. I jumped to my feet and got halfway across the expanse of grass, standing on the tips of my toes and trying to catch a peek. But Mum was calling me inside. I swore she had eyes in the back of my head. Mum always knew when I was outside, when I was near the fence. It wasn't until a month had gone by when I finally got a glimpse of a wilder kid. I had just gotten back from school. I dumped my backpack on my bed and grabbed my phone, slumping onto my bed to text my friends and mindlessly scroll through social media. I noticed movement at the corner of my eye, and when I lifted my head, blinking rapidly, those same blue curtains which had shut me out for what felt like so long, they were open. Not just that. I could see a bedroom, smothered in personality. I glimpsed a hardwood desk, strewn with paper and an expensive laptop, a blue bedspread, a beaten-up guitar leaning against the light green walls covered in old-school movie posters. There were screwed-up pieces of paper everywhere. I had to guess he was some kind of artist. The room was illuminated in the evening dim, a soft warm light bringing the room to life. A knock startled me, and my gaze flicked to the window. There he was, the wilder boy next door. He was my age, maybe even older. This guy looked almost college-aged, which made it increasingly weirder that his mother would insist on babying him at the age of 17. He was cute, the dorky kind of cute. He wore bulky glasses, but was the type to instantly suit pretty much anything. If I could compare him to anyone, it would be the mental image in my head that my younger self had imagined Percy Jackson when I read the books. The guy looked comfortable in a sweater and jeans, mousy brown hair hanging in warm eyes. There was an inquisitive smile on his lips. I jumped up to open my window and to speak to him, but he shook his head, and I quickly remembered his mother's stupid rule, which forbid us from talking. So I got creative. "Give me a moment," I mouthed. I expected him to ignore me and go back to what he was doing, but the guy straightened up and nodded, arching a brow. He was intrigued. I grabbed an old notebook and a pen and sat on my bed, scribbling a message. I wrote, "Hello, so you're the kid under house arrest, LMAO." When I held it up, his smile bricked. He laughed, but I couldn't hear it. I could tell he had a dorky kind of laugh, a nasally one. The guy held up a hand for me to wait and rummaged on his desk. He quickly wrote out a message and held it up with a grin. He almost looked proud of his message, and I couldn't resist my own smile. I expected him to curse his mother, maybe apologize for the lack of communication. But instead, he simply wrote, "Hello, "What's your name?" followed by a slightly smudged smiley. After a moment of consideration, Mum's words echoing in my mind, I thought, fuck it. "Phoebe," I said. "Yours?" "It's nice to meet you, Phoebe," he responded, which spanned multiple conversations which took up several of my notepads. We talked about everything from school to his life at home. He had 3 siblings, Matilda, Freddie, and Isaac. He liked to play the guitar and draw, but also apparently sucked at both. When I asked what his favorite TV show was, he looked confused for a moment before answering. All of them. Following that odd answer, I asked if he liked Marvel. And again, he had that look. A look of confusion. But I knew he was trying to make a good impression. "What is Marvel?" He wrote back, this time his handwriting in a bubbly font. I could almost call his writing calligraphy. It practically danced off of the page. The Wilder boy's strange answers made me wonder if this kid had been homeschooled his whole life. He seemed way too polite. Kids were polite, sure. There was a certain amount of respect you had to pay your elders and parents. But looking at this kid, I wasn't even sure he knew what a meme was, or even the concept of a joke. He had no idea about one of the biggest movie franchises in the world, and his favorite celebrity was apparently all of them. In fact, he had answered all of them to several of my questions. His messages reminded me of my grandma's. Still, though, he was good company. Though I made it my mission to convert him to a normal teenager. I had to guess, due to constantly being home and around the same people, this kid had 0 social skills. I asked him what his favorite movie was, out of the posters on the wall. He had Kill Bill, Reservoir Dogs, and Fight Club. Again, he looked confused, his head cocked to one side, and I had to physically point to them behind him. "All of them," he wrote back with a smiley face. Damn. This kid needed to see a movie which wasn't some educational shit. I bet his mother had turned him into a perfect member of society. "What have you seen?" I couldn't help asking him. "Like, movies, TV shows. Do you play video games?" He shook his head before scribbling back. "What is that?" Holy shit. This kid was completely cut off from the outside world. I was already mentally thinking up plans to get him out of the house and to a party or something like that. From the look of this kid's face, a slightly blank if not completely innocent smile, he needed time away from home, away from his overprotective mother's wicked grasp. After a while, I realized he never told me his name. I didn't notice time go by. Almost 3 hours, and I'd spent most of it lecturing him on movies and TV shows he really should have known. I guessed Mrs. Wilder didn't let him watch the TV. My gaze flicked to his laptop, and I wouldn't have been surprised if she had blocked out all social media. My notepad was full of scribbles and doodles, an attempt at copying his handwriting style. The sky was blooming into twilight outside, thick orange and cotton candy pink streaming the horizon. I've always loved a pre-twilight sky. "What's your name?" I wrote in marker pen, before holding up my notepad. I was running out of paper. I could hear Mum downstairs preparing dinner, and I could tell from his diminishing smile Mrs. Wilder was probably shouting for him to go downstairs. He didn't reply for a while. I watched him put the pad down, before heading over to his desk and cleaning up the paper. Every trace we had been talking, and dumping each response he'd given in the trash, before he slumped onto his bed, wrote something down in several strokes, before holding it up for me to see. Casper, he'd written. My name is Caspar Wilder. For a moment his expression changed completely. He glanced at the door before frowning at the pad of paper on his lap. It looked like he wanted to write more, before twisting around, his eyes widening. Someone was coming. I could tell by the look on his face, the knot between his brows. Caspar gathered everything he'd been using to write to me, pens and pencils, the scraps of paper and the backs of movie posters, and shoving them under his bed. Then he grabbed the curtains and pulled them closed, blocking me out once again. I thought he'd come back, but after standing like an idiot with an odd feeling in my gut, frowning at his curtains, I realized he was finished talking to me for the night. What I expected was that to be it. I didn't think he'd come back. The next morning, however, he was back at his window, smiling at me through a mouthful of toothpaste. He was still in his pajamas, unbrushed curls falling in sleepy eyes. He looked strange without his glasses, like his face was too bare. The more I took him in, though, something was different, though I couldn't make it out. It hit me then. Caspar wasn't moving, staying in the same position. The night before, he had gone to and from his bed, hurrying around to grab equipment to write with. But now he was stood, looking more shadow than human. I was quick to dive for my notepad, but Caspar was already holding up his own greeting with a grin. Good morning, Phoebe. How are you feeling today? Tired, I wrote back, my writing barely comprehensible. Do you have school? Yes, he responded with an excited smile. I'm so excited to learn. Do you have a favorite class? I laughed at that, and after looking confused, he copied my laugh, which made me laugh harder. None of them, I scribbled back. School is boring. Caspar shrugged. I like it. I have a great tutor. Really? This time I drew an attempt at a rolling eyes emoji. You shouldn't be excited for school, weirdo. He curled his lip. You're the weirdo, he wrote back. Caspar paused, chewing on the lid of the pen, before writing. What's a weirdo? You're kidding. This time, with too much vigor, I pointed to him with a laugh. You're the weirdo. We talked as I got ready for school, gathering all my books and homework. I was stuffing my gym clothes in a bag, when I noticed something was on the ground behind Caspar. Looking closer, it looked like a cord. Like a long cable sort of thing. I thought it was for a games console, but then I remembered he had no idea what a video game was. I didn't question what it was for a while. We talked every night, about everything and nothing. I told Caspar about school and friends, filling up every piece of paper we had in the house, and he told me about his siblings. They were all the same age, and all enjoyed school. His brother was a piano prodigy, while his sister's strongest subjects were math. Caspar told me he felt like the odd one out, being the artist of the family, and I quickly told him that creativity was the best part of a person. He showed me his drawings, and to my confusion and slight disgust, they were all of his mother. They were good, sure. His skills were Ivy League worthy. Perfect shading, everything about the drawings was perfect. But the fact that his muse was his mother put a weird taste in my mouth. He showed me each drawing, his smile widening with excitement, while I nodded and pretended to be impressed. Well, I was, though it became startlingly obvious that Caspar didn't have a choice on who he drew. He didn't draw fruit, or landscapes, or even the sky. We live in a picturesque town, the perfect canvas for an artist. However, Mrs. Wilder was at the center of every single fucking drawing and painting. Even with different styles and angles, she was always there. And Caspar Wilder saw no wrong in it. He saw no wrong in this woman taking control of every aspect of his life, his social life, his friends, education and hobbies. I half expected him to grab his guitar and start singing about her through the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. It was driving me crazy. We continued to talk through writing to each other, but soon enough, the only subject was his mother. Caspar asked me if I could rate a drawing he was working on. It was her. Of course it was. I ignored him, getting to my feet and holding up the sign I had written weeks before, but I was too scared to show him. I didn't want to ruin our friendship. But I had to know. I had to know several things which had been keeping me up all night. Why are you okay with your mother controlling your life? I asked in bold letters. And below that, also, I've been wondering this for a while, but what is that thing behind you? The thing behind him was at the center of my thoughts. I'd worked out it wasn't a cord for a TV or a games console, not even a laptop, or for his guitar. Not to mention it was always there, morning and evening, even at night when I spied him getting ready for bed. This thing was always on the floor, snaked across his bed. Sometimes it was even wrapped up on his desk. I couldn't understand the length of it. I asked friends at school and even the internet, but my descriptions didn't do it justice. A long, silver cord-like thing which didn't have an end. Caspar blinked at my message, before he ducked his head and started writing before holding up his response. I love my mum, he said, doodling a little heart. She doesn't control my life. I like that she's in it. Below that, a follow-up message which twisted my gut. What do you mean? I don't see anything, Phoebe. Tapping my pad with my pen, I struggled to think of a response. There was no way he couldn't see this thing. It was pretty hard to miss. Instead of writing, I pointed behind him. That, I mouthed, using my lips for the first time. It felt good to actually talk to him, even if a window of glass separated us. What? His handwriting was slipping slightly, and I noticed his hands were visibly shaking. What can you see, Phoebe? This time, he stood up. I noticed something change in him, the notepad slipping off his knee. Caspar turned around, scanning the room, before his eyes finally found the cord thing. His smile seemed to dampen, eyes going wide, fists clenching. Caspar, I hurriedly wrote when he didn't move for a while. His gaze was glued to the cord. I watched his eye follow it around the room, before his hand slowly raised, trembling fingers moving to his neck, and then the back of his head. Was there an insect? That's what I thought. It must have been a spider or some kind of bug which had startled him. I could only describe his expression as close to catatonic. He stood up, but then quickly slumped back down. But not like it was his choice, as if he was being dragged back down by an unseen force. Like, 1 minute I was looking at Caspar Wilder, then I was seeing a stranger. A completely different person take over a rapidly paling face. Something snapped inside my gut when he moved forward suddenly, his arms lunging out to close the curtains. But that wasn't the end of what I saw. The boy had unknowingly left a splinter, a tiny gap allowing me to glimpse. I expected him to react to whatever had freaked him out, but instead, he simply flopped back onto his bed. This time, I noticed the silver cord jolt with his movement. He was already asleep, his eyes closed. I watched him, my heart diving into my throat. There was no way he just fell asleep like that. It was too fast. Mrs. Wilder came into his room soon after, but I only got a glimpse of her because she was already striding over to the window. I ducked behind my bed, panic creeping up my spine. I expected the woman to start yelling at me through the window, but instead, she simply pulled the curtains properly shut. Mrs. Wilder definitely saw me, and even if she didn't, Casper's messages to me were still piled on his bedsheets. I was left completely in the dark then. I stood and pressed my face against the window, fully aware that I was addicted to the mystery surrounding my neighbor. My mind began to wander to uncertain and scary places. What exactly was Casper's mother doing to him behind the curtain? I wanted to believe she was simply tucking him in and saying good night. But the strange cord-like thing on the ground, and how he'd reacted to noticing it, for what seemed like the first time. His change in expression, like a different person had taken over him, and that person was scared, catatonic. I refused to believe Mrs. Wilder was innocent. I waited for him to draw his curtains again, but he didn't. Casper's window stayed completely blocked for days. I stopped hearing his siblings in the yard, and after days of nothing, Mum reiterated her warning to me over dinner. No communication with the Wilder children, she told me, which includes notes and letters. Busted. So, Mrs. Wilder knew we were talking. I wonder if she was punishing her son for breaking the rules, and that was why he had been MIA for the last few days. There's something wrong with Casper. I worked up the courage to tell Mum. The boy next door. I think Mrs. Wilder is hurting him. Hurting him? Yeah, like... I frowned. I think she can make him go to sleep when she wants. I pulled a face. Like hypnotism. Or maybe even drugs. Drugs, Mum, I said. Mrs. Wilder is drugging her 17-year-old son. That's nice, honey. Are you even listening to me? I leaned across the table, stabbing the page of her book. Mum, Casper Wilder is a total blank slate. I've told you 1,000 times. She's protecting them. She hummed. You have just seen far too many crime dramas, and your generation have been poisoned by the likes of crime entertainment. Finding what you think is your own mystery must be fun, but you are reaching, baby. Reaching? I prodded my own temple. I'm sorry, were you not listening when I told you he doesn't even know what video games are? Mum was acting weird. Usually she talked about school with me, and at least tried to engage in conversation. But she was too busy reading the book Mrs. Becker had recommended her. It was like talking to a brick. You're being ridiculous, Thebe. She turned over a page with a sigh. I've spoken to his mother. She's a lovely woman. We're having lunch next week. I met her in the grocery store. What a coincidence. I shot her a look over my phone. I was looking up child abuse helplines. You're suddenly best friends with the neighborhood witch when I'm caught talking to her son. Dropping my phone for emphasis, I stood up. If you would just listen to me, that's enough. Mum cut me off. She finished her coffee, grabbing her jacket from where it was slung over a chair. Stay out of trouble, okay? I'm heading back to work. I've left cash if you want to order pizza. You have other interests, all right? Please, leave Mrs. Wilder alone. This obsession you have with her kids is unhealthy. Why don't you stick to fiction, Yeah, no. As soon as she was gone, I sprinted to my room to see if Casper's curtains were open. To my dismay, though, they were not. Frustrated, I yanked mine shut too. Slumping onto my bed, I continued looking up helplines. I got bored soon after and started Googling cords and wires which fit the description of what I'd seen. There was a match, though it was on a weird medical website which looked like it had been made in 2005. The interface was outdated and, according to the description, it was some kind of clamping device. There were a lot of words I didn't know, and after further Googling, I was getting increasingly more confused, until my gaze flicked to a section at the bottom of the page. According to whoever wrote it, the cord in question was experimental. There weren't many in circulation, but it was mainly used in medical centers, such as specialist surgeries and hospitals. When I scrolled down, there was a diagram which showed a long cord-like thing, labeled as the body, and a sharp-looking needle. Something warm crept up my throat and I sat up, frowning at the screen. Was that it? Was that thing the end? And what did this thing even connect to? A sudden thud made me almost jump out of my skin. I slid off my bed. It was coming from my window. My curtains were still shut, blowing in the slight breeze. Slowly, I made my way over, my spine tingling. The first thing I saw was red, bright, intense scarlet splattering the Wilders boy's window. Then I glimpsed Casper. He was slamming his face into the glass, over and over again, his already bleeding nose exploding with more red. But it wasn't the boy I knew, the kid I had gotten to know over the last few months. No. This kid was a mess of torn-up clothes, bruises yellowing his eyes, and scratches sliced into his flesh. My first thought was his mum. She must have done this to him. But then my gaze was finding his bloodied nails and claw marks on his arms and cheeks. There was something white wrapped around his head. A bandage. I could glimpse red leaking through, smudging clinical white and pooling down his temples in sharp rivulets. Casper's eyes were an enigma in themselves, a mixture of fear and confusion, and almost feral look of anger and frustration. But the twitch in his lip and between his brow was evident that something was fighting that. Emotions and feelings he wasn't feeling himself. It was like looking at two different guys. One was Casper, the artist who lived next door, who ended every message with a smiley, while this twisted other self, a self which was broken out and was feral in his expression, was a whole different person. I started to realize the more I looked at him, at the mess of flesh and blood caught between his nails, and his trembling hands, every so often creeping to the back of his skull, before jolting and coming back to curl into fists, battering the window. He had clawed into his own head. Immediately, I reached for my phone, but he already knew what I was going to do. "No," he mouthed, shaking his head. So I grabbed my notepad. I could barely write. "What's going on?" I held up my pad. "Are you okay? You're bleeding." Instead of using a pen and paper, Casper squinted, blinking rapidly. His handwriting was different, a manic scrawl, as he wrote in the explosion of blood on the window. When he twisted around, his gaze going to the door, the breath caught in my throat. Someone was yelling his name. I could tell by his reaction. His bloodied fingers clawed at his face and hair, at bald patches and rugged stitches lining his scalp and the back of his skull. They kept going, a narrow line of stitches all the way down his neck, and presumably his spine. My thoughts flashed back to the equipment I'd been looking up. This kind of thing was designed to bury into the brain and spinal cord. I looked for it, but the thing was nowhere to be seen on him. It was no longer on the floor. Casper struggled to write coherently. I noticed he kept swearing, his finger smudging the words he was trying to write. This was more like it, I thought. This was the kind of boy I had expected to be the kid next door. Fuck. He shook his head, his movements erratic as one hand went to the back of his head and came back slick with glistening red. Fuck. He slammed his fists into the window in frustration, but I was already seeing his message start to blossom and make sense. Who? Casper was crying. I could see that he could barely breathe, struggling to inhale, swiping at his eyes with smudged fists. I started to back away, but he continued. When he'd finished, he wrote it again and again, growing more and more fraught. I jumped when he slammed his head into the glass of the window again. At first, a part of me thought he was using his blood for paint, so he was intentionally hurting himself to draw more. But his words spelled it out for me in black and white. "Who am I?" he wrote. "Who am I?" This time I could barely even read my own handwriting. I held up a scrap of paper. "Did your mum hurt you?" I gestured to the bandage on his head, and he stumbled back, wild eyes searching for something to write with. "That woman," he scribbled in block capitals. "That woman is not my fucking mum," he wrote, before he dropped to his knees. He was still writing, but failing to show me. "I don't know who I am." He wrote the same thing 12 times, before tearing up the paper and burying his head into his lap. I gave up writing messages. "Casper!" I shouted. Then I threw a rock at his window, and he lifted his head, blinking rapidly. Gesturing for him to open up his window, he struggled with the latch for a moment before pulling it open. I stuck my head out of my own window, cold air hitting me in the face. "I'm going to help you," I managed to choke out. "Hold on, okay?" Casper clawed at his face. "Help me." His voice was a sharp hiss. "Please, help me. I don't know who I..." His fingernails ripped into the flesh of his cheeks, but he barely seemed to feel it, to be phased. They kept going, digging into layer and layer. "I don't know who I am." He jumped up, suddenly trashing his desk and throwing his laptop against the wall. He reminded me of a child having a tantrum. In this case, though, it was more than acting out. I was sure that Casper Wilder didn't exist. "I don't know who I am. I don't know. Fuck. I don't know who I am. His eyes found mine, and I could have sworn I saw something there, buried deep, deep inside his pupil. He blinked, and it was gone. You need to tell me what she's done to you, I said stiffly. Tell me what she's done to your head. Casper was only growing progressively more frenzied, animalistic. He came back to the window, slamming his fists into it, then his head, again and again, like he was trying to knock himself out. Help me. I can't remember. I can't remember who I am. I just know. I know her. His lips suddenly twisted into a startling grin. Mum, he whispered, his expression softening. My mum. His gaze flicked to the desk. No, she won't like that I've made a mess. Your mum did this, I gritted out. I'm calling the cops. His expression was scaring me. Whatever was in his eye was scaring me. But this boy needed help. He needed to be taken out of that house. No. Casper sobered up. No. My mummy said... She said no, please. His eyes widened suddenly, seemingly noticing the mess of the window for the first time. Oh no. Casper stumbled back. I should clean this before my mum sees what a mess I made. His door opened, and another head poked through. Another guy. I figured it was one of his brothers, Freddie or Isaac. He too had a bandage wrapped around his head. His brother's eyes found the blood splatters, and then me. Like his mother, he strode over to the window, shutting the curtains. But I could still hear it. A mechanical whirring noise, followed by Casper's sharp breath and the sickly crunch of metal protruding through blood and bone. That was it. Mum, I yelled. I'd heard her come back earlier. She must have finished work early. I stumbled downstairs to tell her to call the cops, but a shadow was already looming behind the corner. Before I knew what was happening, a wet rag, stinking of pool cleaner, was being pressed over my mouth and nose. I don't remember passing out. When I woke up, I was laying on my mum's couch. It was dark outside, but the curtains were open. My foggy thoughts drunk in slivers of moon poking from between the clouds, before registering I wasn't alone. Sitting up, my stomach galloped. There was no sign of Mum, but I recognized each of the faces surrounding me. Mrs. Becker was sitting with her legs crossed, delicately sipping from a cup. And next to her, wearing a smug smile, was Mrs. Wilder. She wasn't looking at me. Instead, her eyes were lovingly glued to something which had been built over Mum's coffee table. It was made completely out of paper. The scraps of paper I had been using to talk to her son. Though there weren't just my messages. I glimpsed Casper's writing too. It was a house. I was staring at a perfect paper rendition of the Wilder house, and next to it stood 4 little paper dolls. There were no faces, no expressions, just 4 dolls, 2 boys and 2 girls. Though in her lap were more. Mrs. Wilder's nimble fingers were working to make more of them. They filled her lap differing in sizes. Phoebe, is it? Her voice was smooth like chocolate. I could almost mistake it for kindness. I nodded, my heart in my throat. I was watching her create another doll. She folded a piece of paper in half, cut it in two, and started to fold sections, bringing the doll form to life. This one, unlike the other, did have attention put into it. She had even added the birthmark on my right temple. Following that, colouring in my dark blonde hair, and finishing with my jean jacket. Mrs. Wilder didn't have to spell it out for me. When she got to the doll's head, she shocked me by tearing it off. Then she ripped off its arms and legs, and tearing its torso in half. Mrs. Wilder straightened up. "Phoebe, are you aware of a mother's instinct?" I couldn't reply. Instead, I was staring at the paper doll she had set alight. I watched smouldering orange rip into it, before she put out the fire, dropping the blackened paper doll on the carpet. For just a brief second, I could have sworn the hem of my jacket had also caught alight. Just a single flash of orange. But maybe I was seeing things. "I was pregnant with 4 beautiful children," she said softly. "As soon as I found out, I had already named them." Her smile was dreamy, melancholic. "Freddie, my little Freddie. He kicked quite a lot. Oh, and Matilda. She and her twin were quite the pair, I must say. Swiftly draining me of my energy, so I had to take medication." Mrs. Wilder chuckled. "And finally, Casper. Named after my favourite movie. I loved him with all of my heart. He was my little fighter." She quickly lost her smile, her gaze flicking to me. "I hope you understand that if you talk to, or even breathe the same air as my children again, I will rip you apart too." Mrs. Wilder never raised her voice. She didn't need to. I was terrified of her. She held up my doll for emphasis, before throwing it into the paper dollhouse. "Or perhaps you could become another daughter of mine, I couldn't move, my body paralyzed when she leaned over me, cruel eyes drinking me in. "Maybe not," she hummed. "I only take the dead or dying." Straightening up, she sighed. "It's not a hard task, Phoebe. Keep away from my children, and I will keep away from you." The two of them left after that, leaving me unable to move, to breathe. They took the dollhouse, all of the paper, even my own doll. Casper has been unreachable since. Mum has hardly been at home. I'm starting to lose my mind. I don't know what to do. I don't know who or what Mrs. Wilder is. But I'm afraid she's going to keep adding to her collection. Whoever those kids are, they're not hers. I think she's taken them. She's using them as canvases, dolls, for what she's lost. Am I next? The screaming in the hall echoed and distorted as new voices joined it. Sometimes the subjects screamed so loudly and for so long they ripped their vocal cords apart, or would start spewing blood from torn capillaries in their throats. I smiled to myself. Personally, I had nothing against any of these men and women here, even though some of them were from Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, or Mexican drug cartels. We had murderers, torturers, terrorists, and gang members galore to experiment on. But who was I to judge their actions? After all, I wasn't a much better person. I was just on a different side. I tortured people for the CIA, and to protect the USA above all. Jay, the chubby blonde secretary with a moon face said from behind me. I turned to look at her. Cheryl, I said, nodding my head and smiling pleasantly. Cheryl was the ultimate in compartmentalization. At home, she was just a regular soccer mum with kids and PTA meetings. Here, she was an efficient bureaucrat for a secret black ops project that regularly tortured people, sometimes even to death. She kept each part of her life separate, and never seemed bothered by switching from one to the other. Her help had likely prevented dozens of terrorist attacks and kidnappings across the globe. The screaming was almost deafening now, so I pulled her by her arm and we headed towards a nearby break room, where I poured myself a cup of coffee and lit a cigarette. So I have good news, she said cheerily, smiling a fake, sweet smile at me. Your new method of enhanced interrogation has a 95% success rate. 95%? I exclaimed, elated. That's higher than waterboarding or sensory deprivation or anything else. Actually, that's exponentially higher. The new method of enhanced interrogation, a euphemism for torture, involved a drug called Salvia divinorum. We would extract the main psychoactive chemical from it, which was called salvinorin A, and run an IV drip into the subjects. Normally, Salvia divinorum was smoked and created intense, dysphoric hallucinations that rapidly faded after a few minutes. But by running an IV drip of the drug, we could keep the subjects drugged in a nightmare horror state for days or weeks. Their minds would start to snap after weeks straight of the drug, however. At times we would combine the effects of the drug with sensory deprivation or waterboarding on the most hardened subjects. Being a scientific man myself, I had tried a single IV syringe of salvinorin A, so that I would know what the subjects were going through. Just that one dose was immensely horrible. I saw myself getting cut up into 5 pieces, the room falling apart. The fake plastic plants decorating my office started talking to me and mocking me with sarcastic movements. It was an incredibly uncomfortable and disorienting experience for the 3 or 4 minutes that it lasted, and I could see why even the most psychotic killer would start to crack after days straight of living in that constantly nightmarish void. Cheryl held out a folder to me, a top-secret label and CIA insignia embedded into the front of it. I frowned and took it. What's this? I asked, opening it up. You are being moved, she said, putting her hands up. Look, I tried to argue against it, telling them your research here wasn't finished, but they insisted they have something far more important for you stateside. They want you to leave Guantanamo Bay within 15 minutes. They have a helicopter waiting for you outside already. This is ridiculous, I said, my heart rate rising and warm flush taking over my face. I'm not even close to finishing my research here. I need at least another week to finalize the results. She shook her head at me. Orders from the top brass. Sorry, Jay, she said, turning to leave. Fuming, I went to my office and packed up most of my important files in a briefcase, then walked out to the helipad. It was already running, blowing the salty Caribbean air around me in a deafening cacophony. The pilot took off as soon as I was in the helicopter. Looking to my left, I saw Cheryl. She smiled warmly at me, then looked down at her phone. I sat back in the seat, feeling the vibrations of the craft resonate through my body, as we headed towards Florida. What could they have wanted me to see that was so important it needed me to immediately leave my current assignment? I wondered. I had seen some horrible things. Men breaking their bones as they stained against the drowning horror of waterboarding. Men tearing their own eyeballs out after they had lost their sanity. Prisoners killing other prisoners by ripping throats out with their teeth. I hoped that what they had waiting for me would not leave me with any deeper PTSD than I already suffered. I already had enough nightmares to last me 1,000 years. I had woken up screaming for the past week straight, and at times, I was afraid to fall asleep for what I would see in the dream world. Soon I could see the white sand of the Florida beaches approaching. The Black Ops site was surrounded by 3 layers of razor wire topped electric fences. Guards and sniper towers formed an outer perimeter every few hundred feet. No one had ever escaped from this site, which we simply called the Lighthouse. Inside the razor wire stood a single behemoth of a building, pure white with no windows or insignia anywhere. It rose up and became narrower as it did so. Each floor formed in a perfect circle, and at the top lay a helipad where the pilot now aimed the chopper. It did resemble a lighthouse in some ways, hence the nickname. That wasn't the only reason we called it that, however. This was also the main hub of psychic research for the entire eastern seaboard. The prisoners here were chosen for their supposed paranormal or mystical abilities, to be studied at leisure by the scientists and agents of the CIA. As I got out of the chopper, an agent with black sunglasses and a black suit was waiting for me. "Dr. Salem," he asked me, shaking my hand. "You can just call me Jay," I said, smiling my fake smile. With a gentle guiding hand on my shoulder, he led me down to the top level. "We have been following your research with the Salvinoran agent with rapture," he said, a deadpan expression on his face. As we entered the staircase, the fluorescent lights began to flicker. "We actually modified the agent somewhat, synthetically strengthened it and added some chemical functional groups that make it cross into the brain more effectively. We are about to test it on the first patient here, a shaman we kidnapped from the Amazon after witnessing his ability to levitate objects, to create light out of his hands in pure darkness, as well as other psychic phenomena." I followed him, down a sterile grey hall to a grey metal door, labelled 1308. He opened it and I followed him inside. A naked bronze-skinned man was strapped down to a metal gurney, an IV tube leading from his arm to a machine. From the top of the IV pole hung a solution labelled Salvinoran Ethoxy Alpha C. A doctor in a lab coat stood next to him, smiling as we walked in. The CIA agent nodded at him, and he turned on the machine, letting the solution begin to drip down to the clear plastic tubing and into the vein of the restrained man before me. His eyes widened in surprise, and he lifted his head and looked straight at me. The fires of hell seemed to dance behind his dilated pupils. His face transformed into a vicious snarl, his frown lines deepening to cracks as he regarded me with abject hatred. "You will see how damned you are," he said with a thick Spanish accent, never taking his gaze off of me. "And you will see hell unleashed before you. You are demons in human skin, but the real demons are here to reclaim their throne." He smiled wickedly, the grin appearing to move unnaturally wide until it reached from ear to ear. "The slit wrists of the sky will open up, and the horrors of hell will be with you." "Why is he still talking?" I asked the doctor. Usually, subjects become immediately incapacitated by the intensity and dysphoria of the experience. I've never seen one able to talk before. even on salvinorin A, and you claim this chemical is much stronger than that." The doctor shook his head. "This is not a normal subject, Dr. Salem," he said to me. "This man broke the necks of 2 soldiers as we brought him in, without even touching them. In terms of psychic powers, he is one of the strongest specimens we have ever seen. We have given him large doses of other drugs, such as LSD and barbiturates, and he seems to metabolize them much faster and remain mostly unaffected, even when he is injected with heavy doses." I looked back at the shaman and immediately realized something was immensely wrong. Where there had been a white wall behind him, there now stood a fiery red hallway that seemed to extend for 1,000 feet. His gaze had left me and now stared into the back of the room. A massive metal door that looked hundreds of feet tall stood there. With a shriek of metal, it began to slide open slowly. "The door hasn't opened for 100,000 years," the shaman said, his voice rising with a mixture of euphoria and rage. "But I have opened it for you now." Smoke and fire poured forward from the door as dozens of blackened, grasping hands grabbed it, trying to push it forward faster. The mammoth weight of it held them for a few seconds longer, but as more and more hands joined in, it started to fly open, then smashed into the wall with a deafening roar, like a gunshot going off. I turned to run then, but found the door behind me locked. I ran to it, trying to open the knob or turn the deadbolt, but it felt like I was fighting against a solid metal wall. Looking back behind me, I saw the first of the beings had reached the end of the hellish entryway and reached the CIA agent and the doctor. The beings that ran into our room had blackened, sizzling skin, smoke still billowing behind them. They had no clothes but only burnt flesh. Their eyes glowed red, their hair all gone from the constant fires they lived in, and they began to rip the CIA agent and the doctor apart with their bare hands. They tore off their skin, leaving blackened marks as they flayed them with sheer brute strength, licking the blood off their hands with sighs of pleasure. At that moment, the door to the room burst open, and a team of CIA agents in SWAT gear entered, assault rifles raised. I let them all run past me, and then tore off down the hall. Behind me, I heard screams that echoed after me. I ran back to the helipad and told the pilot what had happened, and we quickly left that den of horror. I don't know what happened back at the lighthouse, but I got out alive. The pilot and I were the only ones, as far as I know, who left that place alive. Hopefully, the evil was contained within its walls. But if it gets out, it may lead to the end of our world. I messed up. Oh, I messed up so bad. I don't know if I'm in danger or going to jail or what, but oh God, did I fuck up. I don't know how I'm going to live with myself. This all started in the break room Wednesday, as I shoved my leftover Chinese into the microwave. Brian leaned back in his chair, inviting Dave to come over Saturday to light up the pit for his birthday. A small gathering, he said. I never get invited to those things. Never. I tell myself it's because I'm in lower management, but I know the truth. I'm awkward around people. I try too hard. Man, I used to do a mean smoked chicken back in the day. I interrupted. I'd never smoked a chicken in my life, but I felt confident no one would be asking me to. Have a great party, Brian. I don't know why I butted in. I guess I was just tired of being ignored. As I reached for the door, fried rice steaming, Brian invited me to the party. I stopped, hand just short of the knob. Sure, I'd misheard. I know it's dorky to admit, but I had to shove my grin down a couple of notches to avoid looking like Patrick Bateman as I turned back around and accepted. I still remember what I told him. Oh man, I'm great at gifts. I'll see you there. Stupid, stupid, stupid. In truth, I'm awful at gifts. I'd been sitting on my sunken couch looking around online for ideas for nearly an hour with no luck. And finally, I settled on a gag gift. It's something that could be regifted amongst the cool guys in the office, occasion after occasion. I wasted another 15 minutes fantasizing about the guys passing the gift around and talking about how I started it all, how witty and funny I was. I could be an office legend. I know it's crude, but Brian had said it would be a small gathering. I figured a few guys from the office and maybe an old friend or two. I decided to take inspiration from my college days and scour the internet for a sex doll. I sucked my breath as I scrolled through the outrageous prices, and just as I was about to give up and go with an old-fashioned blow-up doll, I found a listing from Bad Dolls for You, and she was perfect. The doll's name was listed as Alice. The brief description under the picture proclaimed, "A taste of Wonderland." I couldn't help but chuckle. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and just over $100, with overnight shipping included. The fleeting thought occurred to me that at that price, she might be used. But honestly, did it matter? No one was going to be partaking in any activities with her. At least I hoped not. She was to be the white elephant gift passed among the guys. She was the legacy I'd leave behind as I moved my way up management. She was how the guys would know deep down I was one of them, and they could invite me to bar crawls and parties. She would deliver me from this god-awful loneliness. God, I was so stupid. Without any more hesitation or reading, I pressed buy now. I was giddy. She was perfect. I laid in bed that night fantasizing about the shock on Brian's face as he opened the gift. The guys would howl with laughter. They'd slap me on the back and give me some high fives. It was going to be great. The following morning, I woke with an extra pep in my step. I hummed while I ran the steamer over my collared shirt and gave myself a foamy grin in the mirror as I brushed my teeth. As I strolled to the kitchen to grab my cup of joe, there was a swift knock at the door. It couldn't be. Not this early. And yet, when I opened my apartment door, there stood a large box. I was elated. I dragged the box in quickly and slammed the door shut. In my excitement, I ripped the box open like a wild animal. I tore the packing sheet off the top and paused. She was beautiful, sure, but she wasn't exactly as the ad had shown. Her blonde hair was a bit matted, like a childhood doll forgotten in the bottom of a toy box. One eye was a clear crystal blue, the other an odd yellow. Her freshly oiled bondage leather attire shone in the light. Maybe she wasn't perfect, but she'd do. With only 10 minutes before I needed to leave for work, I roughly brushed her hair. She wouldn't win any awards, but she was smoother than before. Glancing back at the destroyed box, I realized I wasn't sure where to put her. My first thought was to just leave her out. But what if there was a maintenance emergency? I didn't want the office to think I was weird. I bit my lip and settled for the closet. I shoved her in quickly and went out the door. Work dragged on. Everything seemed so trivial knowing the work I had cut out for me at home. I decided to pull Alice's hair into pigtails to further smooth her hair and give her another once-over to make sure I hadn't missed anything else in my morning fumble with her. The guilt of cutting out 15 minutes early from work didn't haunt me like it generally would. I swung my apartment door open and bellowed, "Honey, I'm home." My chuckle was cut short as I entered my bedroom and found Alice lying on top of the comforter on my bed. I froze. Someone had been in my apartment, and they had moved her. I slowly approached the bed, looking Alice over. She certainly looked the same, but nonetheless, I decided to call the office to see if maintenance had been through. According to the impatient woman who answered, no one had entered my apartment. An eerie feeling swept over me. But I figured in my excitement this morning, I'd opened the closet door, but for some reason laid Alice on my bed. I was excited, and I must have been in a rush. I'm forgetful sometimes. Regardless, my enthusiasm had withered. I pulled and smoothed Alice's hair into pigtails before placing her into the closet and firmly shutting the door. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense that I'd been careless this morning. I'd spent a good chunk of the night lost in thought about my perfect surprise. I'd just hit the hay a little earlier tonight. I'd power through tomorrow, and the following day was the party. After a quick TV dinner, I slid into bed. The thought of Alice laying there, staring up at the ceiling, returned. I rolled over a few times, but eventually sleep came. I jerked awake suddenly, to the terrible certainty that someone was staring at me. I was cemented on my back with my eyes fluttering quickly at the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out something hovering a few inches from my face. I stifled a scream as I slowly turned my head towards the figure in the dark. Alice was bent down on all fours, with her mouth stretched open far too wide for what she was intended for. Something in my brain, something primal that had helped my ancestors survive in the forest with carnivorous beasts, told me with great certainty that if I hadn't awakened when I had, she'd have eaten me. Her mouth would have continued to pop and stretch like a snake, and she'd have swallowed me whole. I shoved her head and leapt onto my feet on the other side of the bed. Terror gripped me as I scrambled to escape my bedroom. I threw my gaze back into my room, expecting Alice to be yanking at the knob from the other side, with her jaw jiggling unhinged at her chest. But nothing moved through the crack in the door. I flipped the light from the other side of the doorway and waited. I held my breath. But I couldn't hear anything over the roaring of the blood pressure in my ears. Slowly, I cracked the door completely open. I climbed back onto the bed and leaned over to see Alice sprawled out on the floor. Her head was turned sideways at an angle that begged a broken neck. Her yellow eyes stared dreamily under my bed. She looked different. Paler. Almost grey. Her youthful cheeks were now sunken. She looked long since dead. "Hey!" I yelled. I didn't expect her to answer, but there was a flood of relief when she didn't flinch. She won't move as long as I'm watching her. I didn't know where the thought had come from, but I knew it to be true. I reluctantly turned to boot up my laptop. I realized far too late that I should have read the rest of the ad. Something was very, very wrong with this doll. Alice was marked as out of stock, but the ad was still there to read. A taste of Wonderland. The perfect doll for your enemy. Let her ravishingly good looks lull them into a false sense of security before this sweet Alice transforms into a cutthroat Queen of Hearts. Off with their heads. Just 3 days until your sweet, sweet revenge. Alice will eliminate her owner on the 3rd day, so please make sure she has been gifted to a new owner before that time. We advise leaving no return address. This isn't a gift you want returned to you. Happy haunting. My stomach felt full of ice. I was going to die. This goddamn doll was going to kill me. I threw my laptop against the wall and sobbed. I went to the garage, grabbed some leftover cheap rope from my room and 2 old bike locks, and went to work tying Alice up. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I couldn't risk her moving around anymore. I'd die of a heart attack before she had a chance to kill me. Although, at the moment, this might not be the worst way to go. Off with their heads flashed through my mind. Sleep didn't find me again that night, but in the early hours of the morning, I had made a decision. I didn't want to die. I would go to work, keep up appearances, and on Saturday, I would give Brian the doll. At work that morning, I was utterly distracted. Alice was bound on my couch, but the thought of not being able to see her worried me. At noon, I shut my office door. I jumped when my co-workers knocked and nearly vomited when the phone rang. At some point, I'd have to go home. At some point, I'd have to wrap Alice up, stick a shiny bow on her, and give her to Brian. At some point, I'd be a murderer. Despite my want to get everything over with, I found myself the last to leave the office. I stopped quickly at the store for some wrapping paper. I meant to go straight home after and deal with Alice, but I stopped at the bar for a few drinks first. Lightly stumbling, I entered my home. As I flicked on the light, my heart shot out of rhythm. I slammed my fist against my chest twice before the cramp in my chest subsided. Alice wasn't how I'd left her. She stood in the center of the living room with her head tilted back, one hand raised in a fist, holding a butcher knife, ready to thrust towards the ceiling like a victor's battle sword. She looked more rotted corpse than beauty. I've had enough of this fucking doll. I pried the butcher knife from her gnarled hand and laid her down on the floor. I had no thoughts as I wrapped her. When I was done, she resembled a dead body, wrapped in tacky wrapping paper instead of a sheet. Happy fucking birthday indeed. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't risk her unwrapping herself. I took Alice with me and propped her against the garage wall as I reclined the passenger seat all the way and shoved her inside. I had no idea what I'd tell law enforcement if I was pulled over, but I couldn't risk not keeping an eye on her. Just after 11:45, I cut my headlights as I pulled in front of Brian's house. I nearly left. I started to cry again. I'd even switched the car back into drive with my foot pushed heavily on the brake. But the wrapping paper faintly rustled. Exhausted, and bordering on a psychotic break, I shoved the shifter back into park and got out of the car. Carefully, quietly, I took Alice to the door. I rang the doorbell 4 times fast and ran back to the car. My tires squealed as I tore away from the house, with just enough time to see Alice fall through the opening door. I didn't go to Brian's party. I couldn't. Guilt feasted on me through the weekend. I barely ate, barely slept. When I did, Alice was there, butcher knife in hand, rotted flesh flapping from her jawline as she screamed in a dying animatronic voice, "Off with their heads." Today is Monday. I'm sitting at my desk. We've been open for just over an hour. Brian hasn't showed up or called in. Just before I posted this, I went back and checked Bad Dolls for You's ad. I wanted to reread it, to make sure I didn't miss anything. The ad had recently been updated. 1 left in stock. Order now. I've been packing boxes for the past few days, moving out of my parents' place and into my own. Admittedly, there wasn't a ton to do. I'm trying to furnish a whole apartment with a bedroom's worth of stuff. It's strange how it can seem like you own so many things until you move to a larger space. Suddenly, all of the things that spent years next to each other have a whole new open area to be spread across. There was one box that was nearly forgotten, because it wasn't a newly packed box. It was a box packed by my parents years ago. The one almost everyone has, and has to make a decision at some point about whether to keep it. The box of your childhood things. If my dad hadn't remembered, it would have sat up in the attic for another few years. I wonder what we would have thought as kids, peering into the future, knowing that all of our favorite things end up collecting dust, and only ever thought about when you move house. It's a curious thought. I took the box to my new apartment and began sorting through it. I decided to get it out of the way first, as it was the only box where I wasn't sure of the contents. I didn't know how much I'd be keeping, throwing away, or donating. Putting everything into 3 piles was difficult and emotional. But I was able to make a decision for the most part. To say it opened a gateway back into my childhood would be wrong, as it didn't. A gateway would imply I could walk through it and live it again. What it provided was a window. One which I could only look through and never open. But what a beautiful, crystal clear window it provided. Sorting through that box was one of the happiest moments of the past few years. Until I got to the end. Perhaps the reason I'm focusing so much on happiness is that I'm afraid to continue the story. The final item in the box was a diary. My diary. It was pink and shiny. Cliché, but all the TV shows had that sort of thing in, so that's what I wanted as a kid. I never stuck to many things in my childhood, and this was no different. I used it for about half a year, and even then I missed about half the days. So, even after 6 months, it would only have about 100 entries. I sat there and read every single one. Each dated about 10 years ago, and each one making me happier. But the smile dropped from my face when the dates crossed a threshold of impossibility. 2 years ago. Dear Diary, I totally forgot about this. My dad got a new job recently and had to store some of his old work stuff in the attic. I helped and found this whilst up there. Reading through the old entries was enchanting, to say the least. Maybe I'll come back sometimes and write more. Winky face. Alicia. My handwriting? My name? But I hadn't been up here 2 years ago. My dad didn't get a new job 2 years ago. This didn't make sense. I wasn't exactly scared at this point. I just didn't know what to think. I was just confused. And so I read on. 1 year ago. Dear Diary. This again. Although I don't remember writing that last year. How strange. Was still cool to read through all of this though. I've just moved out and found this in a box of old stuff. Good job my dad reminded me about it. I'm hoping that living alone isn't as scary as it seems. I suppose only time will tell. Future me, you got this. Alicia. How could this be dated a year ago? This all happened, but it happened the same day I had read it, and I certainly never wrote it. 6 months ago. I'm not doing this diary shit. What the fuck is this? I've never had a diary in my entire life. How does this thing know everything that has happened to me as a kid? At this point, I started to freak out. This entry wasn't like the others. It wasn't just confusing for me, but clearly whoever wrote it was also confused and concerned. Except they still seem to think they're me. The next one changed that. 4 months ago. How odd. This entire journal perfectly describes my life, up until a couple of years ago. I'm moving out in a few months. I haven't already moved out. But all of the entries as a child perfectly mimic my life, except for one crucial detail. My name is Rebecca. How on earth could this be? The next one was the worst. 2 months ago. Dear Diary, someone just broke in. I'm hiding in the attic, and I found my childhood diary. I've called the police, but I'm scared. I just need to take my mind away from this. The police wanted me to stay on the phone, but I was afraid of making noise. I can hear them downstairs. I hope I get to read this again soon. Writing this makes me feel like I'm going to be okay. It turns this into a memory, and not a final day. I wish I had time to read the past entries, but I don't. I promise I will soon. I just hope that I manage to. The entry ended there. It's covered in dry blood. At this point, I was physically shaking. But I felt like I had the duty to continue this. And so I did. I took out a pen and wrote. Dear Diary, I don't know what this thing is. Will I remember writing this? What kind of power this book has is beyond me. But whatever is going on, I don't like it. I died? I moved out a year ago? My dad got a new job 2 years ago? My name is Rebecca? None of it makes any sense. My pen ran out of ink, so I went to look for another one. I intended to finish the entry. But when I returned, the journal was gone. I wonder where it went. There's a payphone in the empty lot behind my high school that still hasn't been demolished, even though it hasn't had power in years, because nobody can be bothered to take it down until someone buys the property and builds something on it. Which is never going to happen. Our town is small enough that most businesses wouldn't bother, and even if someone living here wanted to open one, there are other empty lots in much better locations. There is also a playground rumor that if you put a quarter in the machine and dialed a specific number while you were alone in the booth, you would be able to talk to a spirit called Amaryllis that would grant you any ability you desired. There were a couple caveats. You can only use the phone once in your lifetime, and you can't change or get rid of the ability once you've got it. You also take on a curse that you'll be stuck with forever, and you have no say in what it is. The spirit chooses it. Generally speaking, the more powerful the ability you ask for, the worse the curse would be. If you wished for the ability to telekinetically move apples, your curse would be something like getting more hangnails than usual. If you wished for telekinesis in general, your curse would be something like never having anyone's trust when it's cold outside, or spontaneously combusting if you heard music while you used your power. Curses come in 2 different flavors, Mara. That's how my next-door neighbor, Natasha, explained it. She was 3 years older than I was, and I believed anything that came out of an older kid's mouth, whether it was true or not. You either get a curse that is unrelated to your power, and is just a general bad thing that sucks to have happened to you, or a curse that is cost to using your power, like taking a month off of your lifespan every time you use it. I got the first kind. Natasha was the first person to tell me she had actually gotten a power, instead of saying that she knew someone that did. She said she wished for extremely good luck, and in exchange, she was unable to lie about anything for the rest of her life. There wasn't a direct way to prove it, but Natasha had won every single raffle she'd ever entered at the town's winter and harvest festivals, found $100 in her backyard, twice, and admitted to her teacher that she cheated on her test, which was enough proof for 8-year-old me. And I wanted in on it. But I couldn't use the phone, because you need to dial a specific number for it to work, and Natasha refused to tell me what it was. That's also why everyone in town who believes in the rumor doesn't immediately try to get free powers. It's extremely hard to get the number, and most of the people who know it don't tell you about it. There are tons of people, mostly kids at my school, that claim to know the number, nor have powers, but 99% of them are lying, and all you're going to get is a false lead. Look, Mara, you're too little. You're going to pick something you'll regret, if you can even make a decision. Despite my begging, she would not budge. She never gave me the number. But I ended up getting the number from another source several years later. When I started 8th grade, a new kid joined our grade. Her name was Louise, and I was in charge of showing her around school. I told her about the phone and about all the stories I'd heard, and about a month later, she told me she used it. Natasha gave me the number. Why? She never gave it to me, and I asked for it for years. She shrugged. She said I'd make a good wish, so she gave it to me. What did you wish for? I'm not telling you. So, what's your curse? Not telling you. Then there's no way to prove you've used the phone. You're probably lying. Louise scowled at me, cheeks turning red. I'm not lying. I can prove it. How? Louise slyly grinned. I'll give you the number if you buy me that cute jacket I saw at the mall last week. That jacket was $80, but I had birthday money to spend. I'm not going to buy it unless you give me the number, and it works. That's expensive, not wasting it on a fake number. She handed me a folded slip of paper. You better keep your end of the deal. I went to the payphone right after school, stuck a quarter in the dusty slot, and used my sleeve as a shield to cover my fingers while I touched the faded buttons. I held the phone to my ear, trying to ignore the germs that I'd get on my face from it. Hello. Are you looking for Amaryllis? This is really happening. The voice on the phone wasn't what I expected. I'd always imagined the spirit to have a louder, more intimidating sounding voice. She spoke much softer than I thought she would, and sounded much younger than I thought she would. If I wasn't talking through a phone with no power, I might have thought it was someone from school playing a prank. Yes, I want a gift from you. And are you aware that I must take something from you in return? Yes. All right. Who do I have the pleasure of giving this gift to? Mara Winters. What kind of gift do you seek, Mara Winters? I'd thought about this for years, and I finally had an answer. I want the ability to see the future when I want to, unless it's impossible to change the future. If that's the case, then I want a different gift. The future can be changed, yes. Are you sure that's what you want? Yes, I'm sure. Then I shall give you the gift. But in order to use it, you must pull out a fingernail every time you wish to take a glimpse into the future. You have to pull it all the way out. Breaking off pieces won't work, and you can only use fully grown nails. Do you accept this trade? I paused for the moment, weighing my options. On one hand, pulling out a fingernail every time I used my power would be incredibly painful. On the other hand, I'd have a surefire way to calm my chronic overthinking and anxieties. Yes. The call ended right after that. I showed up at school the next day with a huge smile on my face, and Louisa's new jacket. She was the only person I told besides Natasha, who was pissed that Louise just gave me the number without asking her first. It's been 2 years since then, and I've only used my powers twice. The first time was to test out that they worked. I successfully predicted what I had for dinner that night. But besides that, it was pretty useless. The second time was to see if the plane I was going to go on for the annual freshman year field trip would crash, because I'm terrified of flying, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Spoiler alert, the plane didn't crash. That was until last week, when I was forced to use my power 10 times. There was this boy named William, who lived a couple of towns over. He was a senior at our high school's rival school, and somehow, I don't know how, he'd gotten Amaryllis's number. He was also a huge jerk that unironically called women females, called himself an alpha male, and his entire Instagram was filled with shallow motivational quotes about being successful. You know, that kind of guy. I'd barely ever talked to him, so I was confused as hell when he showed up at my doorstep out of the blue. What are you doing here? I called up that ghost girl on the old ass phone. I want to see if my powers will actually work, or if that bitch scammed me. She said she gave you future sight, so look into my future. See if my powers are going to work when I try them out tomorrow, so I don't look stupid. Amaryllis can tell you who else used the phone, and she'll say what powers she gave them. I should have asked her what she gave Louise. He tossed me a pair of pliers. Also, she said you'll need these for some reason. I glared at him for a second. Well, come on, get on with it. I don't have all day. No. Why not? My curse makes using my power painful, and I don't like you very much, so I'm not going to do it for free. The powers work. You don't need me to verify anything. You little bitch. I'll do it if you pay me. Fine. How much? $50. 10. Nope. That's not enough. 15? No. I'll do it for 30. That's my final offer. Take it, or fuck off. He rummaged through his pockets, mumbling something under his breath, probably an insult. Pulled out a $20 and a $10 bill, and threw them at my face. Here's your money. Well, get on with it. Okay. I took a deep breath, clamped the pliers to my left pinky, and pulled. Whoa, holy why did you do that? You crazy. Show me what will happen when William uses his power tomorrow. I'm standing by Shelley Smith's locker. William approaches her. What do you want? Join me, my dear. Be captivated by my beauty. Instantly, her eyes glazed over, and William's thumb shrunk into his hand, vanishing completely, like it was never there. Do you love me, Shelley? Of course I do. I love only you. Would you do anything for me? Of course. I snapped out of my vision, screaming. You wished for the power to brainwash people. What is wrong with you? So it works. Sweet. Is that why you used the phone? You wanted a date with Shelley? That is so creepy. Bold words from someone who can easily be turned into one of my puppets. I'm sorry. What? Take another look into your future. See what will happen if you keep pushing my buttons. So you know I wasn't bluffing. Honestly, I thought he was. But it was better to be safe than sorry. And he'd already put the thought into my head. I yanked off another fingernail, grimacing through the pain. Show me what will happen if I keep bothering him. I'm standing in front of my doorstep with the same glazed-over look Shelley had. William has a finger missing. Oh, all right. I can see you're not bluffing. William grinned. If you tell anyone else about this, anyone at all, I'll brainwash you. And don't think I won't find out. I will. I guarantee it. And then he left. Most people wouldn't believe me if I told them what had happened, and the few that I could probably couldn't do all that much. Plus, I ran the risk of getting both me and them brainwashed. The bastard had me stuck between a rock and a hard place. So, even though I didn't want to, I said nothing to anyone, and tried to ignore the nauseous feeling I felt in my stomach. When I overheard the gossip at school the next day. Holy shit, did you hear Shelley's dating William? No way she's out of his league. They're a thing for real. This is your fault, Mara. You let this happen. You're just as bad as him. It didn't help that practically everyone, including my friends, were talking about it. And over the next few days, there was even more gossip about William. He was suddenly the most popular kid in his school. His parents suddenly went from strict to super cool, basically letting William do whatever he wanted. This will blow over eventually. Try to forget about it, Mara, I told myself. Then, I got a text from an unknown number. Hey, future girl, I need another vision. Do it for free this time or I'll wipe your mind. Obviously, I knew who it was, but I had no clue how he got my number. Who gave you my phone number? I replied. That's not important. Are you doing it or not? Fine. FaceTime me, he replied. I did, and sure enough, William's stupid smirk greeted me. What do you want? Jeez, you can stop with the sass. Anyways, Shelley wants to use the phone. Check to see if it'll work or not. I sighed, grabbed a band-aid and pliers, and pulled. Show me what happens when Shelley uses the phone. Shelley sticks a quarter into the slot, staring into space with empty eyes. The phone rings. Hello. Are you looking for Amaryllis? Yes. Shelley's voice is flat and void of emotion. Oh, hello, William. Unfortunately, I can only give one gift. I am not William. Ah, but you're being controlled by him. That means you were instructed by him to do so. Sorry, but you can't ask for gifts for other people. Goodbye. She hangs up. It won't work. Why? You only get one gift. That's what Amaryllis said. William sighed, looking frustrated, and hung up. My hand stung, but I had a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to do any more favors for this douche, and I needed to know whether or not he was going to bother me again. I yanked out another nail. Show me if William asks me for another favor. I'm sitting in my room, playing a game on my computer. My phone buzzes. Hey, future girl, I need another vision. I'm throwing a party at my house and I'm worried one of my neighbors will call the cops to complain or something. Alright, so he was going to bother me again. Maybe I could block his number. Actually, yeah, why don't I just do that? I quickly found his number and blocked it. Then again, he could just track me down and ask me at home or school or something. And would he be mad enough to retaliate and mind control me? I wouldn't put it past him. And the thought had already burrowed itself into my brain, like a tiny little worm, squirming around, screaming, "You're gonna die, Mara," over and over again. I could just unblock it right now. But what if it was the solution to all my problems and I was ignoring it? I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on my homework. I went over to Natasha's and played video games with her, desperately trying to ignore my intrusive thoughts. I tried reminding myself that my hand felt like it was on fire, and if I pulled off the last of my nails on that hand, it would feel even worse. But I had to know what would happen if I left the number blocked. So I pulled my nail off, trying to ignore the fact that having 5 nail beds completely exposed, only hidden by a couple of bandages, was an injury that would be hard to explain away if anyone asked. And the agony I was currently in. You can't scream right now. Your mum will check on you, and then she'll think you've gone insane. Show me what will happen if I keep William's number blocked. I'm walking home from school. William's car pulls up beside me. Hey, I told you I needed a favor. Why didn't you respond? I didn't get your message. Whatever. I'm here now, and I need a vision. So he was going to find me in person. Great. At least he didn't immediately mind control me. I didn't really want to see him in person, so I left the number unblocked and waited for the inevitable text. Which happened a day later, while I was making myself a snack, instead of playing on my computer like in my vision. Everything else played out the same though. I had to sacrifice another nail, which meant both of my hands hurt like hell. Fantastic. So I asked if the cops interrupted William's party, and I saw a vision of a bunch of police cars outside William's house. Damn it. I've only got 4 sacrifices left. Huh? My curse, dumbass. I have to sacrifice body parts. I've only got 4 left to sacrifice. You only have 4 body parts left. Sacrificable ones, yeah. Every time I use my power, I have to give that stupid ghost woman something more important. She started with a finger or a toe, and then she started taking things that are way more vital. She took an ear and one of my arms. Fucking scammed me, just like all the other girls in this town. Sounds like you should stop using your power then. He angrily hung up, and for a moment I was paranoid that he was going to use his power on me. Then I was like, no, he's too worried he's going to lose something vital. He just said so. And then my paranoia got to me, and because I am a chronic overthinker, I impulsively ripped out another nail. I was not brainwashed in the vision I saw, but I was bleeding all over the kitchen counter. So I quickly cleaned it up, bandaged my hand, and told myself I was done using my power until all of my missing nails grew back. But then, I did something stupid. William decided he was going to throw the party anyway. He just made it a lot less wild than he'd planned. He invited a bunch of people from his and my school, including me. I should have said I couldn't come, but I was invited to a party with a bunch of the most popular kids in both my school and his. And there are barely any parties thrown in this town. Plus, it seemed like William couldn't use his power without taking a huge risk, and I could probably spend the whole party avoiding him. He'd be busy hanging out with all the other people he invited, right? So, I went to the party. I did one smart thing, I guess. Or maybe it was weird and paranoid. I put some bandages and a pair of pliers in my purse before I left for the party, just in case William decided to ask for another favor. He didn't, but I would need them. The party was going great for a while. I was hanging out with Louise, having a great time. And sure enough, William was so busy hanging out with other people, he barely even noticed I was there. Honestly, it was the coolest party I'd ever been to. Until I heard a scream. One of Shelley's old friends that she'd immediately dropped once she started dating William was holding a knife to a girl's throat. 2 more people with knives were standing beside them. Where are Shelley and William? Everyone panicked. Some people tried to run, but most either froze up or hid somewhere. I hid behind a counter. I was close to the window. So close I might have had the chance to run out of it, but I wasn't sure. For once, I didn't have to hide a pained scream when I pulled out one of my last 3 remaining nails. There was plenty of screaming covering mine up. Someone tell me where William and Shelley are. Show me what happens if I try to run. I dive over the counter, attempting to open the window. It jams as I try and open it. One of the kids with the knives notices me and grabs me. Tell me where they are. or I'm going to kill her too. The knife is put to my throat. The girl they were holding hostage is on the ground, dead. Before anyone can say anything, the kid slashes the knife across my throat, and I immediately collapse to the floor. I snapped out of the vision, still hidden behind the counter. The girl who's being held hostage is still alive. If you guys don't tell me where William and Shelley are, I'm going to kill her. Nobody says anything. Just as he was about to cut her throat, I found my voice, knowing that everyone else won't. He's upstairs. I wasn't sure if that was true. I have no clue where they are, but I don't want this girl to die. He let the girl go. You move, you die. That goes for all of you. Two of them started heading up the staircase. Tamara, stay by the front door. Kill anyone that tries to leave. I saw William and Shelley hiding in a closet by the staircase. I gave them the wrong location, which was both good and bad, because I didn't want them to find and kill the two. I may have hated William, but I didn't want him dead. But I also didn't want anyone to die when they found out that they weren't upstairs. Maybe we could all ambush the one girl who was blocking the door and escape. Or we could... One of the partygoers' voices interrupted my train of thought. Anything you wish, William. Someone ran out of their hiding spot and tried to tackle the two kids walking towards the staircase. His eyes had that telltale glazed-over look that I knew all too well by now. He managed to tackle the one, but the other person stabbed him before he could do anything else. William sent another person to try and fight them, but he spoke a bit too loudly, because they realized where he was now, and rushed towards him. He started screaming at all of the people nearby. Join me, my dear. Protect me from them. Keep me alive no matter what. Take away their knives. Fight them and... Wait. Did the person by the door just join in on the fight? She did. I grabbed Louise's hand. We might have a chance to make a break for it. Just let me see. The adrenaline coursing through my veins completely blocked the pain of ripping another nail out. Show me what happens if we run. Louise and I run out of the door, hand in hand, following the crowd of other kids who had the same idea as me. We run out the door, while the fight rages on in the house. Nobody stops us. Let's go, Louise, now. We sprint out of the door. It was 57 degrees outside, and I'd left my coat behind. But I'd never been more relieved to feel the cold air stinging against my skin. Some people stood by the doorway, waiting for their friends to come out. Some drove away in their cars, or called the police on their phones. I was separated from Louise while she looked for her brother in the crowd outside. Most of them halfway down the block by now, but I've frozen up in front of the house, which has gone completely silent. A group of people with glazed over eyes leave the house, carrying something. No. Someone. A boy that I can barely recognize. He was missing both his arms, one of his legs, an eye, an ear, and his mouth. His mouth was gone. At first I thought William was dead, but when the group passed by me, I saw his eye moving around to look at me. He was still alive. The group rushed towards me, and everything went black.
Miss, can you hear me, miss?
I awoke to an EMT shaking my shoulder. My ears were ringing. They shined a light in my eye, then asked me to say the months of the year in reverse order. My head was pounding, and my mind felt foggy. I mixed practically all of them up. A lady walked me to an ambulance. "She may have a head injury. Take her to the emergency room." The rest of that night was a blur, mostly due to the concussion I'd got when I collapsed. But I remember hearing someone say that 4 people were dead, and that William was missing. When I woke up the next morning, the doctor's first question was about what happened to my hands.
Did you bruise all your nails when you fell into those rocks?
I fell into rocks?
You must have hurt your hands pretty badly, because most of your nail beds are exposed. They must have fallen off after you fainted, probably when Sonia was moving you to the ambulance, because when you got here, they were all gone, minus this one, which is probably going to fall off too.
What? I looked at my last remaining nail. There was, indeed, a huge bruise underneath it. I learned that 4 people died that night. 2 of those people were Shelley's old friends. The 3rd one had been arrested. Apparently, they were furious that Shelley had completely abandoned them after years of friendship, and acted like a completely different person, so decided to get revenge. The other 2 dead were the girl that William had mind-controlled to tackle the ones looking for him, and a boy who the attackers mistook for William, since he looked similar. William and Shelley were missing, along with a couple of other partygoers. Not only that, but so were his parents, and a couple of teachers who weren't even at the party. Suddenly, I remember the last thing I'd saw before I passed out. William, being carried away by all the people he brainwashed, missing so many of his limbs, but still alive. I didn't know whether or not it was real. A couple hours later, the doctors gave me the all clear to go home, telling me I'd still needed to rest for a while. On the car ride home, my last remaining nail fell off. I don't know if this counts, since I didn't pull it off, but I might as well try. I whispered as quietly as I could, so my parents didn't hear. "Show me if William will ever be found." I'm in a locked room that appears to be a basement. William is hooked up to an IV. All his glossy-eyed puppets are standing around his bed, brushing his hair, or adjusting his sheets, or just tidying the room in general. He is tied to the bed he's on. He can't say anything, because his mouth is gone, but tears are falling down his one remaining eye. I can read the look he's giving me, even though he's not actually looking at me, because this is just a vision. But I can tell what he's thinking. He wants someone to kill him. I spent a couple days just processing everything that happened. My parents booked me an appointment with a therapist as soon as I got home, and they let me take time off school for a little bit. My therapist recommended I take up journaling as a way to cope with things. I've kept most of it private, but I'm sharing this entry as a warning. If you're going to mess with a supernatural force, make sure you understand it. Make sure you know what you're getting into before you agree to something. If you find out where the payphone is and decide to use it, please read this story before you do. Remember that every present, no matter how amazing it seems, is always surrounded with strings. Hello. My name is Mike, and I've been doing garden work for about 15 years. I've never had any abnormal jobs, other than your typical creep who wants to watch you trim the hedges. Other than those types of jobs, my 15-year career has been normal. Until a week ago. I got a job from some rich executive who has a hobby for gardening and shrub art. He had a nice mansion, not too far from Los Angeles. I usually work in the Bakersfield area, but the pay for this job was too high to decline. It was only about an hour and a half drive, so it was totally worth it. I arrived at the house in the front of these fancy silver gates. I walked over to the intercom and pushed the button to call inside. It was silent for a few seconds, until a voice came from the other end. Hello there. Yeah, hi. I'm here for the gardening job? One moment. A few seconds later, the gate slowly opened. All of the equipment is in the little shed right of the main fountain ahead of you. The owner has left you a note on the table in there. Okay, thank you. I walked into the property and turned towards the shed. I crept open the old wooden door and entered. Inside was a bunch of gardening equipment that I was used to for my job. There was a little wooden table in the corner of the shed. On top was a note written on a piece of crumpled loose leaf. The note had an old coin resting on top of it. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. Then I started to read the note. Hello. I am the homeowner, Mr. Glensworth. I have left you this note to make sure you do the finest job you can on my prized shrubbery. Before you get to work, there are a few rules I need you to follow. Number 1. Make sure the blades of the saws are fully secured before starting. I want very precise cuts. There should be no wiggle room for the blade to move. Fair enough. Number 2. Never enter my house for any reason. I don't care what the situation is. Do not enter. The only time you shall enter is if rule number 10 applies. Sure. Number 3. If an older, balding gentleman wearing a suit exits my home and tries to talk to you, ignore him. Just continue with your duties and he will eventually wander off. Strange. Rule 4. If you hear someone call your name, you didn't. Just ignore it. Is this some kind of joke? Number 5. At some point during your time here, my dog will approach you. If his tail is wagging, rub him on the head until he walks away. If his tail isn't wagging, drop everything you're doing and leave. You will still be paid for your time. Do not, under any circumstances, refuse to pet my dog. It will be angry. This dude is a creep. Number 6. If a maid asks you if you would like anything to drink, decline. It will try to poison you. It. Rule number 7. If you hear a screech coming from the forest, get inside the shed as fast as possible. Sit down on the floor and close your eyes. Stay in that position until a second screech is heard. It will get you if you do not. What on earth is this guy talking about? Number 8. There's a chance that a limo will enter my property. If this is to happen, enter the back of the limo. Try to remember the path it takes. It will take you to a random location within a few miles of my home. Once you get dropped off, try to make your way back. If you get lost, then the best thing for you to do is pray that your death is quick. Death? This better not be some sick fucking joke. Number 9. If a man approaches you claiming to be me, kill him. That is it. Do not kill him if he says rule number 9. That is the real me. It's rare that the real me will be there, so make sure. I don't like this. Rule number 10. This rarely happens. In the case that all the staff come running out of my home, you need to enter, find a bathroom, and look in the mirror. 10A. If you see yourself, then exit the home and continue your duties as normal. 10B. If you see no reflection, close the bathroom door and be completely silent. If it enters the room, do not react or move. It may circle around you. Whatever the case, do not react at all. It will eventually leave. Once it leaves the bathroom, look in the mirror again. Repeat this process until you see yourself in the reflection. This can't be real, right? I placed the note in my pocket and grabbed my gear. I headed out to the first shrub and started to work. About 10 minutes in, I heard my name in the distance. I was about to look, but I remembered rule number 4. Horrified, I continued to clean up the shrub. About an hour went by and nothing unusual happened. I was around 20% done with the job when I heard panting behind me. Suddenly, a loud bark made me jump and yelp. I turned around and saw a golden retriever with a purple collar, his tail wagging steadily. I put the saw on the ground and started to pet the dog. 5 minutes passed and the dog didn't move. After about 10 minutes, he stood up and walked away. Finally, I thought. As I watched the dog happily trot away, I saw an older, bold gentleman in a suit, hastily walking in my direction. Fear washed over me. I quickly picked up the saw and got right back to work. I heard the sound of footsteps stop behind me.
"Excuse me, sir."
His voice sounded like how you think a British monarch would speak. He repeatedly spoke that phrase for about 7 minutes, when he finally stopped. I heard him stroll away. Relief hastily washed over me. I continued to do my job. Some time passed without any event happening. This has got to be some sort of TV prank, right? I thought. Just as this left my brain, an elderly woman tapped me on the shoulder. It really spooked me. I quickly gazed towards her. Her wide smile was unsettling. "Would you like something to drink? A water, maybe?" Her voice was frail. I was really parched and could definitely go for some water, but I knew what would happen. No. I'm okay. Thanks, though." She turned around in a perfect 180. The smile never left her face. I was curious as to where she was going to go, so I watched as she walked away from me. When she got to the fountain, I expected her to turn right and head into the home. But she never. She kept walking straight, towards the woods. When she reached the edge of the property, her head quickly flicked in my direction. She was now staring at me. Her smile now faded. I jumped and quickly turned around. I took 1 or 2 deep breaths and looked back. She was gone, as if she faded out of existence. Now I was really creeped out. I started to get back to work. At this point, I was about halfway done. I kept working, knowing that every branch I cut got me closer to freedom from this hell. As I finished a shrub, I heard a loud screech come from the woods on the other side of the property. It was similar to an elk call, but stayed at the same pitch for an extended period of time. I dropped the saw while it was still on and made a break for the shed. I slipped on the grass a few times before I finally reached the shed. I shut the doors, sat down and closed my eyes. My heart was racing at 1,000 miles. As I sat in the darkness, I heard scratching at the door of the shed. Suddenly, another screech blasted through the property. I heard something quickly shuffling away. I stood up and opened the shed door. For a split second in the distance near the woods, I saw a black blur fade away into the trees. I was frozen in place. After about 10 seconds, I snapped out of it. I got back to work, my heart still racing. I was almost done with my job when the roar of an engine blasted behind me. A limo slowly peeled into the property. I sighed. I dropped the hedge trimmers I was using and walked towards the limo. As I opened the door, I peered up at the woods. Standing behind a tree was the maid I saw earlier, smiling again. I got spooked and practically jumped into the back seat, shutting the door behind me. I felt the limo begin to move. I looked out of the window as we did a U-turn. Remember the path I take, repeated in my mind. The ride totaled about 10 minutes. I had a basic idea of the path we took. I started to walk back to the home. After about 30 minutes or so of walking, I saw the opened silver gates, and a sigh of relief came out of me. This hell was almost over. I could see the remaining shrubs in front of me. Only about 10 more. I started to trim a shrub when I heard a door swing open. I looked behind me and saw all the staff run from the home, out into the woods. I quickly sprinted towards the front door and entered the house. I ran up the fancy staircase and started opening every door I could see. Finally, I came across a bathroom. I sprinted in and gazed into the mirror. Nothing. There was no reflection. I slammed the door shut, slowly backed up from the door, and stayed still, being as silent as possible. After about 2 minutes, the golden doorknob started to twist. The door swung open with aggressiveness. Then I saw it. It looked like a normal human. The only difference was it was completely naked, about 8 foot tall, and didn't have any facial features. There was just smooth skin where there should be eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It crept into the bathroom slowly. My heart felt like it was going to pop out. It started to get closer and closer, until it stopped. Its face was about 1 foot from mine. I felt like crying, but I knew that would be a death wish. It started to circle me slowly and steadily. It circled me about 5 times. Then it crept out into the hall and down the stairs. I slowly turned around to face the mirror. As I peered over my shoulder, I could see my own eyes wide open, staring back at me. The relief washed over me like a tsunami. I eventually exited the house and returned to my duties. The last shrub had 1 more branch to cut. I pushed the saw against it. I watched it fall to the ground. I unplugged the saw and watched the cord bounce off the damp grass. As I looked up towards the fountain, I saw a man walking towards me. I froze in place. He came up to me and introduced himself as Mr. Glinsworth. I was relieved to see him, but then rule number 9 phased into my memory. He didn't say rule number 9, I thought. I quickly picked up the hedge trimmers from my belt and shoved them into his head. It didn't bleed. It just fell to the ground like a rag doll, still smiling. I stepped over its body and started to walk towards the fountain. I pulled out the note before leaving, to make sure I didn't forget anything. I went over the note, and thought it was done. That's when I spotted a small arrow in the bottom right corner of the note. I flipped the note over. On the top line of the page, there was one more rule. Rule number 11. You must throw the coin that was on top of this note into the fountain before leaving. Once thrown, a taxi with no driver will pull up in front of the gates. Get in the back seat and close your eyes. Then count to 10. Once the countdown ends, open your eyes. You will be inside your own car. Once this happens, you are relieved of your duties. I took the coin out of my pocket and stared at it. I threw it into the fountain water with a flick. Behind me, the sound of a car horn blasted through the street. I turned around, and there, parked by the gate, was a cab. I headed up to it and got into the back seat, shutting my eyes and starting to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I paused, and then said the final number. 10. I waited a few seconds, and then opened my eyes. I was pulled over on the side of the road, inside my car. I peered over at the GPS. Just above the little car icon that showed my position, read the words Bakersfield. I was home. This happened about a week ago. I haven't really been able to sleep. I can't get the image of it out of my mind. I'm recording this because I need some closure. Has anyone ever heard of anything remotely close to this? I can't find the mansion on Google Maps anywhere. Am I going crazy? Did I dream all of this? Was I drugged? I don't know. But I'll never forget what happened to me. My wife, Kate, sometimes calls me Jack when she gets upset. My name is Tom. Jack was the name of my wife's first husband, and that's pretty much all I know about him. Kate was reluctant to talk about the marriage. It was unusually brief and, from what I gather, wholly unpleasant. I did my best not to pry. Still, the idea that there was a man before me would sometimes tug on my insecurities. I usually kept my feelings to myself, as I didn't want to open any old wounds. But now I'm starting to wonder, what happened to him? I met Kate shortly after I finished my undergrad at the Houston Symphony. I'm not sure why I went, since I never preferred classical music, but I couldn't complain about free tickets. Unbeknownst to me, I would sit next to my future wife during Mozart's Requiem. Kate and I talked the whole time. It was like I had known her for years. I mustered up the courage to ask her to dinner, and have been madly in love ever since. Kate was a bit older than me, which I had no problem with. She was just finishing up a psychiatry residency when we first met. Kate came from a wealthy and posh English family, with long ties to the banking industry and scientific discovery. They intimidated me because I was the first person in my family to even complete high school. We didn't see Kate's family much. and I got the impression that they disapproved of our relationship. But that didn't matter to Kate. She loved me for who I was. We eloped after only 6 months of dating and moved in together. Kate started her practice in our new home, and life began to make sense. I didn't have to worry about money anymore, and Kate suggested I quit teaching to focus more on my novel. I've been writing a book, but my creativity and willpower took a dive when I started teaching. Sitting at my desk all day was dull and isolating. I sometimes wondered if I was even meant to be a writer. To decompress, I'd take walks in the park and watch the landscapers cut the grass and trim the hedges. I felt an odd kinship toward them and fantasized about riding on one of their lawnmowers in the hot sun. Anything was better than being crammed at my desk. But I knew Kate would be disappointed if I gave up writing entirely. The boredom got to me one day. I just couldn't stand being trapped in my study for another 8 hours. Kate was at a medical conference, so I had the whole house to myself for a few days. After 1 or 2 bottles of wine, I found myself standing outside Kate's office. Kate was very protective of her office space, and I couldn't step foot in there unless I brought her lunch. But I was drunk, and my curiosity got the better of me. So, I went in. Kate's office was smaller than I remembered. It had olive green walls and was usually dimly lit with candles. There was a relaxing waterfall fountain in the back corner, and when you lay on the chaise lounge, you felt like you were in a tropical paradise. I sat down to clear my head, when I noticed another door in the room. I was sure I had never seen it before. I opened the door and was greeted by a black room with soundproofed walls. In the middle of the room was a tiny round table with 2 lounge chairs. An old light bulb hung from the ceiling. What the hell was this place? It felt strangely familiar, and I felt anxious when I explored it. In the corner of the room was a dusty filing cabinet. It must have contained patient records. I know I shouldn't have opened it, but I was still inebriated enough to do something irresponsible. I opened the top drawer, but it only contained one thing: a wrinkled composition notebook. I picked up the notebook and realized it was someone else's journal. The first date was almost 10 years ago, written on the top margin in faded black ink. Jack Taylor. I rushed back to my study and slammed the door. I knew I would feel terrible for invading Kate's privacy once I sobered up, but I started to read the journal anyway. The first entry was short and many words were either crossed out or misspelled. Dr. Kate said I should keep a journal to write down my thoughts. She said it would help me feel better. So here they are. My name is Jack Taylor. I'm 25 years old. I was born in Waco. I like to be outside. I like to watch the Cowboys on Sunday. I like to drink Lone Star beer. That's all, I guess. I almost started laughing. No wonder their marriage didn't last very long. This guy was a total dud, and not at all Kate's type. I wonder what she saw in him. I decided to keep reading as my ego prevented me from not making fun of this guy. I glossed over to the next entry. I showed Kate my first page, and she got mad at me. She said that this journal was for feelings and emotions. Well, excuse me. It was her idea in the first place. I feel bad, I guess. She's so smart, and I'm me. I'm just a gardener. I'll have my own business someday, though. Then I'll ask Kate to marry me. I started to feel bad after the second passage. Jack may have been a bit dim, but I could definitely empathize with him. I always felt like I needed to be better for Kate. It could be hard to be with someone so much more accomplished than yourself. I mulled over whether or not I wanted to continue reading, but I decided to keep going. The following passage was dated almost a year later. I know it's been a while since I've written in this journal, because I decided to only write when I felt depressed. Kate keeps bringing up the idea of me going back to school, and while that sounds nice, I'm content with our life. I enjoy writing and even have ideas for a book, but I'm not sure I want to return to college. The landscaping business is doing better than anticipated. It's blue-collar work, and I know Kate is embarrassed because her family back in Cornwall disapproves. However, we said our vows, which should mean more to her. I'll talk to her tomorrow. I need to put my foot down. I stopped reading to pour another glass of wine. It was interesting to hear Jack's perspective on his marriage to Kate. Kate never outright said anything nasty about Jack, but I always got the feeling that he was solely the problem. I guess situations are always more complicated than they seem. I flipped to the next page with a different perspective. Plus, his writing had improved dramatically since his first entry. The fighting with Kate is getting worse. Why can't she just accept me for who I am? I will never be the sensual, introspective novelist that she desires. I have a business to run. A business, I might add, that has paid for this house and extra additions for her new office once she finishes her residency. I'm just so exhausted from the constant mental gymnastics with her. It's almost like she's trying to conform me to her weird fantasy. I like what I do. I shook my head and took another sip of wine. It was almost surreal reading Jack's journal. We were more similar than I had initially thought. Was Kate doing the same thing to me? I really enjoyed teaching, but I knew it wouldn't be enough for her. I kept reading. Last night, I had that terrible nightmare again. I dreamt I was sitting in a dark room and sitting at a chipped wooden table. Kate was there too, and she kept turning the light on and off while saying terrible things to me. Before I woke up, she was screaming, almost foaming at the mouth. I've never seen her that angry before. I haven't been able to sleep very well recently, and I honestly don't feel like myself anymore. I've called in sick to work for the past 3 days. I thought being outside would help me breathe again, but working is the last thing I want to do. Perhaps Kate is right. Maybe a change of scenery would be helpful for me. I froze after I read the last page. The room Jack dreamt about had to be the same in Kate's office. Was Kate doing something to him? I crept back to Kate's office and slipped into the room again. It felt even smaller this time, and the feelings of anxiousness rose from my stomach again. I grasped my chest, struggling to breathe, until I thought I was almost suffocating. What was going on with me? My knees started to buckle, and I slid into the cold wooden table's only chair. I looked up, and it felt like the Vanta-black walls slowly moved toward me. I mustered up all my strength and threw myself at the filing cabinet to put back Jack's journal. This time, I knocked over a small manila folder from the top of the cabinet. Was this here before? I grabbed it and rushed out of the room, collapsing on Kate's chaise lounge. I quickly came back to my senses and inspected the folder. It was filled with documents, and on the corner was a rectangular blue sticker labeled Jack Taylor. Inside were patient records and various essays, scribbled with handwriting that looked like Kate's. Was Jack Kate's patient before they were married? That didn't make any sense. Kate hadn't even started her practice when we got married. How was she already treating patients? And to marry one? Kate was almost paranoid about following ethical guidelines. To break her oath seemed unfathomable to me. Against my best judgment, I opened the folder and combed through the pages. Jack was undergoing treatment for dissociative identity disorder and depression. Early forms of therapy weren't helping, and Kate wrote in her notes that she would try a controversial form of treatment as an alternative. Hypnosis. My eyes immediately darted to the corner of the room, the door still hanging wide open, revealing an abyss. So that's what the room was for. I kept flipping through the pages, and found through Kate's notes that the therapy seemed to be working, though Jack's disorder desperately tried to fight it. There were several documents on hypnotherapy, and a letter from a former professor on his experience implementing the procedure. I knew from Jack's journal that he had vague memories of being hypnotized, and that they manifested into his dreams. This was wrong. A photograph slid out of one of the papers in the folder. I picked it up to examine it. It was a picture of Kate and a man I assumed to be Jack. He was burly, with cropped black hair, a bushy beard, and an apparent farmer's tan. He looked familiar, but I didn't think I had ever seen him before. Maybe I learned too much about this man, but I'm deciding to confront Kate about him. She always preaches that honest conversations strengthen relationships, so now is the time. I'm going to finish up writing here, and then wait for Kate to get home. It may be painful, but I need to do this for myself. And maybe even for Jack, wherever he may be. I suppose I owe you an explanation. I'm honestly impressed at how much of a sleuth you are. I have no idea how you came across Tom's musings, though it does not matter. Fine. I will grant you this one favor. Jack came to me as a patient in the early 2000s. He was a gardener who drove his large truck through a bar during a manic episode. I must admit, he was quite striking when I met him. Tall, muscular, and hairy. Exactly my type, physically. He wasn't... Oh, how do you Americans say this? The sharpest knife in the drawer. But what if he could be? What if he could be convinced over time that he was the man of my dreams? Hypnosis is a tricky procedure, and it takes years to bind someone to your will. I hit an impasse after Jack and I were married, until I had an epiphany. Jack Taylor would never be a romantic writer who would serenade me with poems and beach novellas. But Tom Rhodes could be. I didn't need to bend someone to my will. I needed to get them to believe they were not the person they thought they were. Through hypnosis, a gardener could become a novelist. Plus, I always preferred the name Tom. The experiment went extraordinarily well at first, but alas, Tom's disorder was incredibly resilient. It was like his DID was leading him to the truth in a twisted and cruel way. I knew he was getting close to finding out when he started writing less and drinking more. I told him I was going to a news conference and let him figure out the truth for himself. Where is he now? Oh, darling, I would not worry about Tom anymore. His job is done, and he is now at peace. I am ready to close the chapter on this experiment. I'm done with using hypnosis for love. But you, what are we going to do with you? Yes, I know. Who in their right mind uses TikTok? I was always starkly opposed to social media, especially TikTok. That cesspit of stupidity and regurgitated jokes should have never become a thing, and not one as huge as it is today. I wish I'd never downloaded the damn thing. I really wish. Or maybe I do, after all. Well, never mind. One night I was bored. After my computer broke, all I had was my phone. I was never a book guy. Hell, I didn't own any, and mobile games could only entertain me so much. So, one day, I gave in and downloaded TikTok, as my Play Store recommended. At first I was annoyed. More than annoyed. All I found were short clips of people acting like idiots. After a while, though, I found the occasional interesting piece of content. Little life hacks, for example. Videos on how to survive in the wild. Do-it-yourself guides, or how to prepare a hot meal without using a stove. I was always intrigued by these things. Needless to say, I got hooked. For the past weeks, however, I got interested in a different type of content. Urban exploring, that is. The real deal, I mean. Not the bullshit in which a creator's friend covered in a bedsheet pretends to be a ghost in a dark hallway. No. I like to watch people explore old mine shafts, abandoned buildings, or ghost towns. While it was fun for a while, I didn't like the fact that I'd never be able to visit any of the places I saw. After getting acquainted with the shit show that was TikTok's search, I began browsing hashtag after hashtag. Eventually, I'd found a few local content creators who explored abandoned places in my area. Now, my city isn't huge, but it's not small either. So there was quite a bit of content. Occasionally, I'd even watch a live stream. There was something exhilarating about urban exploring. Before long, I put together my own list of places I wanted to see. If I ever left the house, that is, and if I was ever man enough to do so. Tonight, I was notified about another live stream. It was by two guys I'd recently discovered. Most of their content was typical for TikTok, stuff I didn't care about. Sometimes, however, they checked out abandoned places. I joined the live stream and heard they were on their way to one of the notorious abandoned areas of my city. Yeah, bro, this place used to be like hot shit back in the day. Like everyone wanted to live out here.
No way, dude. You're fucking with me. That tower block over there is going to collapse any minute now.
I swear, man. But it was like decades ago. I heard they even wanted to renovate the place at one point, but never did.
Yeah? Why didn't they?
No clue. Place is a money sink, I guess. Or they realized it's all old shit.
Yeah, like the rest of this city.
Both of them began guffawing, and I couldn't help but frown. They seemed to talk in the typical, annoying, over-the-top way all influencers did these days. I hated it. Before long, however, they'd reached a giant, old apartment complex. For a while, they continued on down a small, deserted street. Then they followed an alley that led them right into the center of the complex. The entire place was ruined. What might have once been a nice little park was now completely overgrown. Rubble was everywhere, and here and there I saw stacks of old, half-rotten construction materials.
Hey man, do you hear that? It sounds like crying or something.
one of them suddenly said. His friend's face appeared in front of the camera. An anxious look washed over it. Then he began laughing. "Fuck, bro, you almost got me." By now, both of them were laughing again, like the idiots they were. I wasn't. God, these guys were annoying. With a sigh, I put the phone down, ignored their annoying voices, and couldn't help but stare at the empty wall in front of me. What the hell was I even doing? Why the fuck was I watching some teenager's stupid TikTok livestream in the middle of the night? While I questioned my life choices, a flashlight beam reached me from outside. In an instant, I got up and went towards my balcony door. Having a ground floor apartment always makes me uneasy. The area I live in isn't a bad one, but it's not exactly a good one either. You never knew what could happen. One of my biggest fears was to find someone trying to climb onto my balcony and break into my place. I took a deep breath. It was probably just someone's phone. Then I pushed aside the curtain, trying my best to stay hidden. Right outside, in front of my building, I saw two figures. Each one was holding a flashlight in their hands, blasting their beams over apartments and windows alike. What the hell were they doing? Didn't they know people were trying to sleep? Once more, one of them sent their beam straight into my apartment, illuminating my living room. Those assholes. I bet they were trying to fuck with people. From outside, I could hear their laughter and their high-pitched teenage voices. Got nothing better to do, eh? Growing angry, I pushed open the balcony door to tell them to go away. Right when I stepped outside, one of them was actually trying to climb onto my balcony. For a moment, the beam of his flashlight hit me right in the face. "What the fuck?" I screamed while I instinctively shielded my eyes from the blinding light. Screaming in surprise, the guy tumbled backwards and crashed back down over the balcony railing. In an instant, I was back inside, throwing the balcony door shut. That was it. Now I was pissed. Fucking around with flashlights was one thing, but trying to break into my place was a whole different story. I put on my shoes, threw on my jacket, and stormed outside. Before I did, I got a hold of a broom. Just in case, I told myself. When I pushed open the apartment building's door, I saw they were still right there. One of them was on the ground, probably hurt from tumbling down, while his friend was trying to help him up. The moment they saw me, they both froze. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I screamed at them. In my anger, I began waving around the broom, hoping to show them that I was serious. No, we did nothing, I swear. We didn't know someone lived here. We're sorry. We're sorry." One of them called out to me. By now, the one on the ground had gotten back to his feet. "Get the hell out of here." I spat at them, taking a single, well-measured step forward. By now, both of them were shaking. They were pleading with me, crying and repeating their "we're sorry" as they backed away. As I stood there watching them, this entire situation felt weird. Why the hell were they suddenly so scared? Just moments ago, they tried to climb onto someone's balcony, and now... My anger evaporated, and I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Still, I lowered the broom and tried to look as non-threatening as possible. "Look, I don't want anything to do with you guys, alright? Just leave." They were still scared, but nodded vehemently, promising they'd never ever be back again. Then they both turned around and booked it. As I looked after them, I still didn't know why they'd been so scared. I mean, sure, I'm a big dude, but more fat than muscle. Don't tell me it's because of the freaking broom. On the way back inside, I couldn't help but laugh at the entire situation. Freaking teenagers. I'd barely entered my living room when I heard their voices again. I jerked around and went back to the balcony. Don't tell me. No one was outside. The balcony was empty, and so was the area in front of the building. What had I just heard? Then I saw my phone. TikTok was still open, and the stupid live stream from before was still playing.
Holy shit, bro. What was that?
Did you guys see that? Did you just see that? As I picked up the phone, I saw that the two of them were still running. The chat was going crazy. Messages were coming in at an almost astronomical speed. I could barely read anything. But what I did mentioned the words crazy person and squatter. As I continued to listen, there was soon no doubt anymore. It was the same two guys. The same two idiot teenagers who just tried to break into my place. Hadn't they gone to some abandoned area, though? How did they end up here? I reasoned they'd given up on their urban exploring and went to fuck with people. But how'd they make it here so quickly? Wait, where exactly did they go? There weren't any abandoned places nearby. By now, more and more people in the chat were asking about the abandoned area, about its location. When one of the hosts finally answered, I was even more confused. It was my area, my home. But this place wasn't abandoned. I lived here. People lived here. I was right here, sitting in my living room. There was my bedroom, and over there... No. Calm down. Don't be an idiot. This was TikTok, after all. Who knows? Maybe that entire live stream was pre-recorded, and in reality they went out to fuck with people for new content. Hell, maybe they found me on their follower list, saw I lived nearby, and decided to prank me or something. Yeah, that had to be it. The more I tried to convince myself, however, the more I realized how ridiculous those scenarios were. Yet, the alternative... A new notification interrupted my thoughts. It was a new TikTok video. One just posted by the guys whose live stream I just watched. When I read the title, I shivered. Highlights of the craziest live stream ever. Run-in with an insane squatter. We almost died. Holy shit. I read the title again, then once more. With slightly shaking hands, I pressed play. I watched as the two of them walked past abandoned buildings. Then they were at the apartment complex, moving their flashlights around. Finally, one of them tried to climb onto a balcony. Right at that moment, an unkempt, bearded guy jumped from an opening that might once have been a balcony door.
What the fuck?
I heard him scream. The phone slipped from my hands and my head spun. There was no way. There was no freaking way. That was my voice. My face. Only it was... different. In the video, I looked dirty, unkempt, bearded. My voice sounded rougher, deeper, and, most of all, crazier. I told myself I was wrong. This entire night was getting to me, and My mind was playing tricks on me. That's all. Then I picked up the phone and played the video again. There it was. My face. My voice. I watched as my alter ego burst from the building, holding a metal rod in his hand. I heard as I screamed at them in an almost incoherent voice. Almost. I understood enough.
The hell do you think you're doing?
It was the same words. The ones I'd screamed at them not even an hour ago. In an instant, I threw the phone across the room. There was no way this was real. It had to be fake. Some sort of stupid trick. A deep fake or God knows what. In an instant, I dashed into my bathroom, turned on the lights and stared at myself in the mirror. There I was. Cleanly shaven, slightly muffled hair, but overall, pretty presentable. Then, for a second, I could almost see my hair grow. Could almost see the dirty, unkempt beard and the crazy eyes I'd seen in the video. I cringed back. No, it's not real. Back in the living room, I shivered again. Why was it so cold? I could almost feel a breeze blowing through my apartment. I checked the balcony door again, but it was closed. As I stared outside, however, I wondered, how long had I lived here? When had I last spoken to someone? Hell, when had I last seen anyone else who lived here? I'm sitting here right now, typing this out in as much detail as I can. I don't know what the hell's going on. With all of this, I mean,
I'm right here, in my
apartment, sitting on my living room couch.
Yet, as I'm typing this, I can feel it again. This cold, almost freezing breeze. And every once in a while, I almost can't help going through a beard I know shouldn't be there.
Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.